See, look at that. Awesome. All right. When we did some of the planning, we were actually thinking it might turn out that we could do 2 cases. And the reason that is because what we did is we made like a list of, on this case origin grid, we made a list of some of the things from the courses, like the quality course and then the tools course, to say what are some of the topics we cover, and then the X's are where that we see linkages back to waste management, potentially. Okay, so you see there's overlap in there. So there's the analytic part where we were obviously involved in the tools class, but then on the other side of, because you brought up the point of what is quality in this industry, it also is great for looking at it from just quality management, voice of the customer, what is all that stuff. So I think that would be, it could basically do both. So like I said, what we did is we just went through and marked up some of the things, some of the areas we thought, let's see, where we saw some overlap. Now I guess what the objective of this meeting is to get sort of these questions talked about. It's basically the background of the firm. Usually the cases are written, they're written around like a question or a problem or some decision point that was made up. And so if you can maybe start with like some background. I know only a little bit of it, but sort of to how did things kind of get to where they are today relative to the process improvement stuff. That may help us, and we can kind of.
Let me ask you to close the door there. Make sure we don't have interruptions. I'm going to find a certain slide here that I also. Cool. Downside of having 2 screens.
Oh,
you got to remember to look at both screens. Thank you.
How's that?
That's perfect. Okay, so just, you guys have seen my presentation. You probably took lots of notes and remember everything about it. But there's actually some other information, that in that time that I've come across that I think tells an important story. And this particular slide shows the number of single stream MRFs in the United States over a period of time. And understand recycling as an industry is one of the oldest probably practices in our history. I'm sure cavemen were, saying this is a perfectly good round wheel. It just has a chunk off, and they somehow decided how to recycle
Make it smaller.
that wheel, right? So, but single stream recycling, where you actually have a municipality whose goal is to recycle, which is independent of demand. It's not a supply and demand driven market. Instead of having a recycling industry that was born out of a need, out of a customer need for a commodity, you have something entirely different in the equation, and that's this municipal, pursuit of environmental, goodness, and so they're trying to divert things away from landfill and make sure that they're used.
Now, why would the municipalities would care because they also pay for the landfills, or they just have a perception that that's bad?
It's twofold. One is in the state of Florida, for example, and it's not uniform across the United States. There's different motivations depending on the culture. In California, they have a different culture, and they tend to recycle completely for the purpose of trying to protect their environment, and just for a better, greener, healthier society. They're willing to pay about $100 per resident in the city of Santa Monica. That's what a person would pay per month for their waste disposal and recycling.
Okay.
And it's almost all recycled. Very little actually goes to waste. In other municipalities, it might be a more practical concern that they pay $40 a ton or some number for landfill disposal, but if they could get it recycled, maybe they don't pay anything, or they even get a rebate. And that's how a lot of the contracts were structured in the past.
So that's incentive for the haulers, but not for the municipalities, unless they see that money back, right?
Well, in that case, the rebate goes to the city. So there's different structures of contracts around all this stuff. But not to get too far off, what I'm trying to show you is that it's driven by this desire to produce a commodity. When you think about it, when we're talking about recycling is producing a commodity, and instead of burying it in a landfill. And that commodity may or may not have a market. And aside from that, the price point of that commodity, the production is not tied to a price point. They don't really care how much commodities are worth. They still want to divert it.
Right.
And the other thing is, when you think about quality, where does, and now we're kind of working way back to the topic, when we talk about quality in a product, where does that quality come from? I mean, in the sense of who determines the specifications for quality? It's not the producer, it's the customer. It's the customer that says, I can use your product that conforms to my process, and that, you know, if I can get it at the right price point and it can do all the things that I need in my process, I can use it. But in municipal recycling, there's this expectation that if we produce it, somebody's going to need it somewhere. So, but there's no signals from the marketplace that help determine what the quality should be or what the price point should be that actually ties back to that municipality. So everything we're talking about is really a complicated situation for that one reason, that people want to recycle. People try to recycle because you think it's the right thing.
Bless you.
But it's not. Bless you. But it's not unlike, you know, if you were growing corn or pumping oil out of the ground, and you just created this mandate that you're just going to make this many barrels of oil this year, independent of whether anybody needs it or what the price is or whether the cost of production is higher than what you're going to sell it for. That's what municipal recycling is. So it's a really peculiar situation. So for a recycler, our revenue comes from the commodity we sell. So it becomes really important, the quality, the composition, and even the average material value of that material. When you see a big pile of what looks like garbage, it has a value. If you go through and pick out all the stuff, it's like if you have a pocket full of change, you know, the value of that's going to depend on how many quarters you have and pennies and that combination. The same thing with the material that comes in. So material in South Florida might be worth $50 a ton versus material in maybe Tampa, which might be $100 a ton. If my machine can only run, or my process can only run so many tons per hour, then you end up with a situation where you could be producing material that costs you more to produce than the revenue you get from it, depending on the value. So here's, when we talk about single stream recycling, in 1995 there were really only 5 recyclers in the U.S. There were 70.
This isn't just Waste Management, this is overall the whole.
Yeah, this is the whole country.
Okay. Mm-hmm.
There was about 70 in 2001. There were 160 in 2006, and then in 2012.
Municipalities or companies? Which was it? I'm sorry.
Municipal single stream recycling.
So those are collection points,
Yeah.
in essence, right? Independent of the number of companies that handle it.
Yeah.
Okay.
So this is what this looks like. It's a big shift, a big change. It's really occurred recently. What that means is these volumes in the millions and millions of tons have went from, there was no process built around them, to all of a sudden across the United States there's a whole industry that's spending millions of dollars. Millions would be at one site. One site could cost $10 to $20 million. So for each of these sites, processes have been put in place, huge capital investments have been made, with an expectation that they're going to receive this material, they're going to process it, and they're going to have a buyer that will purchase it. What we've seen, though, is a deterioration in pricing, because what happens when you produce a commodity independent of demand is eventually you create an oversupply. and if you have an oversupply, then you're going to see the price fall. You also see a tightening of quality standards in those situations. So if you have too much of something and you're trying to sell it, the buyer is going to be choosy. It's a buyer's market, so he's going to say, well, I want only the best, recycled paper, the best recycled cardboard, or whatever it might be. So you're faced with then lower prices, and your cost of production is actually increasing if initially as you're putting in quality systems that didn't exist before. So that's really where kind of our industry's at right now. It's a big challenge.
Do you know if those industries are much different depending on where you are in the world? Are these unique? Do you know, or just do you have any view of?
They're impacted differently in different parts of the world.
Well, I know as far as maybe local consumption or who wants to buy them, but I'm just saying, what am I saying? Is this sort of, let's say, push out demand, if you will? Is that just for the U.S. or is that kind of, how does that reflect the rest of the world, or do you know?
Well, Europe was about 10 years ahead of us in putting this automated systems in place.
Okay.
So the concept of having an automated factory, basically, that's processing some of this single stream material or any kind of material, and doing it in a high volume, way that needs these processes built around it, was developed, sooner in Europe.
Okay.
For similar reasons, they, for health reasons, to keep the environment clean and all that. And there's a lot of different economics that come into play. For instance, they had made a determination at some point in the last 20 years that landfills were a bad thing, and they really wanted to, close their landfill. So they more or less created enough regulatory restrictions around landfills that they made the cost of disposing it at a landfill so high that your best alternative was to find anything other than a landfill. So that changes the dynamics a lot. Now the city really does have to become concerned with making sure it's diverted, so that increased their diversion rates, but it also allowed other alternative uses for recycling to appear. So one of the things that's happened in Europe is the use of these same recyclable materials and the waste from these MRFs to be used as fuel. So they'll actually use it as a combustible material, replace coal, and I know of at least one instance where they use it in the U.S. There's a place right here in Miami that's using it for a cement kiln. So if you go in there, Titan Cement down here, they've got a control room, they've got all these screens, they've got maps of, and all the screens of their process. There's temperatures and sensors are feeding in the different kiln temperatures, and as they're feeding in this waste in lieu of fuel, they can monitor the temperatures of their kiln and they can make changes. And they're pursuing, with me, with this site, alternative uses for our waste that way. But the economics made more sense in Europe sooner than it has here. Now it's becoming shifting a little bit different here to where it could be an alternative, for me.
And so is waste management in Europe too, or is that just in the U.S.?
We only operate in the United States, in North America.
In Canada, right?
Yes, Canada and U.S.
Okay. So the industry basically started, the municipality started demanding this, and then would you say that the current waste handlers were then across the U.S. were stressed to then, okay, find out how you're going to deal with this, and this is where what happened? Did they either choose, so the objective of waste management, they said, okay, well, we already handle waste to landfills, that's our business, and now we have an opportunity, right, for...
What waste management didn't want to happen, they're already, we're twice as big as our nearest competitor. And then after that, that's Republic, and then after Republic, it gets really small. So we are, a behemoth in our own industry. And then we have landfills as well as the trucks that collect the material. So what we do not want to see is a trend where landfills disappeared and we were left basically competing just for the collection of the material. If you control the contract for the material, you're really controlling the whole, process, you might say. So they didn't want to see that end use of that material shift away to other competitors who would then start taking over the recycling and let that whole industry grow independent of waste management. So they believe that they should be part of that. So through acquisitions, they created, certain recycling group, and then within that group, they had expertise that had engineering and the marketing of the commodities, how to sell it, and they, over the years, they've realigned, restructured, how that's done. But they've also continued to grow. There's some big regional companies. Green Star was one that was an acquisition. It was probably the largest independent recycler that we've acquired. We still have other, competitors in recycling for sure. But as far as one that has both a company that has landfill, recycling, waste, and some other types of waste handling solutions.
About when was that decision made to go into essentially the MRF business? Do you know?
That was recognized in the late 90s and around early 2000s is when they started forming that group.
Okay. So that was a central group, that was at the headquarters for Waste Management, and they basically figured out and started to deploy it, or how did you?
Well, they formed a group called WMRA. It was kind of an independent. Not sure if that was a subsidiary, how they had that set up, maybe even as a separate, like LLC or something initially, until as it grew, it just became. They restructured it, and now it ceases to exist now. So now it's all.
Oh, okay. So they had like a little think tank for a while, and then
engineering and the sales of it just gave them kind of a opportunity to grow, without.
How long did that before that went back away and was reabsorbed?
Approximately 10 years.
So that was like the first decision. It sounds like to me, is they decided to get into the business, and it was not proactive; it was reactive. They didn't create the concept of recycling. They were reacting to the numbers right here, right?
What they did do though is they pushed very hard for single stream recycling, and up until that point in Miami-Dade County is a case in point. It was a dual stream program, so you had paper, all the paper and cardboard separated, and then your plastics and containers in another bin.
And glass.
And I'm not sure if glass was part of that program.
I remember being up in Maryland, we had separation requirements for a long time. It was paper and plastic and glass. I think it's 3 separate.
So waste management at that time, I think, naive.
In the 90s?
Naively.
Oh, naively, excuse me.
Entered into, the recycling business. The waste, their familiarity was in the collection, picking up material and hauling it someplace and dropping it. And I think their sensitivity to what a recycling plant was a place they could pick up the material, they haul it there, and they drop it. And then they'll do something with it, whatever it is those guys do, they squish it into these big cubes, and then they ship it away.
Okay.
And so there was so much more to it than that. These companies, as you can see, it evolved. Really, this is how it happened in recent memory. This isn't Henry Ford talking about the automobile. So in recent memory, people, management who are still in these companies today went after these contracts, and it's very competitive. And so, I'm sure people always try to make a promise, right? And knowing that whatever we have to do, we'll make it happen. So dual stream required, a lot of extra handling. It was inefficient compared with single stream. So, what Waste Management and other companies did was said, we can come and pick it up. Just put it all in one bin. We'll sort it out. We'll make it easy for your residents. And
so double stream or single stream, that actually came from municipalities. Again, it wasn't a mandate, or I'm trying to get a feel for who made the decision on dual stream or even single stream. Was that?
Well, that's a good question. I think that's always a difficult one to answer because it is the city that controls the process. The city is the customer on that end, who's paying for that service. There's not a mandate to them unless it comes from a regulatory agency.
Right, and there's no regulation. So at that time, are there any regulations that require?
Well, there were diversion goals. So like the FDEP created a goal, and they say it's not a mandate, but a goal of 75% by 2020. 75% of what goes to landfill be diverted away toward recycling. So,
and was that a literal one? So they said that was a 2020 goal. That's the only goal they really put out for diversion. Yeah. Is this locally or to what level do you know?
That's the state of Florida.
State of Florida.
FDEP.
Okay. So, and that's the first one, and this was put out before, about when?
This is in the 2000s. I don't know the year.
Around 2000?
Yeah, there's a statute. No, I don't know what year. If it was 2000 or sometime after.
Okay, so we can find that. So that, just to find out where the pressures are for making these decisions, and comparing them to when you all at Waste Management made the decisions or tried to influence the decisions, is who's
right. So
interesting.
So yeah, the state created a goal and it communicated to municipal leaders that you need to divert, work toward this goal by 2020. So they did it. They took it to heart, and it was in their best interest. If you wind the clock back, recycling prices were much higher. The quality standard for the commodity being sold was much lower, so production costs were lower 10 years ago. So rebates could be offered to the cities. So for the city, they have a mandate to recycle, and they're going to get paid for it. So it's a no-brainer. And companies like Waste Management that were trying to come into the scene said, there's a new technology. It's been created. We don't create the machines or anything, but we knew of the technology. We knew of the machine companies that could design systems that once all that material is commingled together, we'll pick it up, bring it to our place. We can throw it into the process, and it'll separate all that stuff out again. So, and that in the dual stream also had to do separation. It's not that there weren't already the need to separate some of those materials apart, but the idea of mixing all the fiber in with all the containers was really a different twist to it. That in itself didn't create our contamination issues that we have across the country, but the idea that, again, that was an offspring of that supply side push to create or to divert, because it was really independent of mixing it. No one asked the question, if we mix it together, will it devalue the material? Right. It didn't matter. It makes it more efficient. Right?
No one asked that? It wasn't...
well, if you could prove me wrong, go ahead.
No, it's just interesting.
I think there were probably protests at the time that fell on deaf ears.
Okay.
Because it was just such an overwhelming, this is the right thing to do.
Oh, I see.
It's one of those.
Oh, you mean single stream versus dual stream? That it would seem an obvious no-brainer from the municipality's point of view or from the handler's point of view?
I think from everybody's standpoint.
Really, everyone thought, well, no, single stream's got to be better.
Yeah, it was everybody pretty much went down that road.
So from your side, the handler's point of view, you thought it would be better pre-engineering to really know, because you thought, what, simplify, or what was your indication that a single stream would be better than dual or other?
Okay, from the perspective of companies like Waste Management, it had to do with cost.
It would be less,
so it would be more efficient.
You have one line instead of two, basically?
Well,
or?
From the collection standpoint.
Oh.
It takes fewer trucks, and there are a lot of trucks out
there. Okay,
so the collection becomes more efficient. And here's the other kicker. Instead of just having little bins that have to be, literally you have people walking down next to the truck, picking up the bins and dumping them in the bottle compartment, the container, the paper. With single stream, they said, well, you know what, we can make these giant carts with lids on them, and we can use an automation on the truck to pick it up and dump it. So again, you've eliminated that cost. So in the interest of efficiency and lower cost of collection.
Okay, so collection really seemed to drive that.
That really drove that.
So what about the municipalities? You said they seem to be interested in single stream too, but were they for the same reason, because they perceived it to be a lower cost, or was there some other reason?
Wouldn't their customers say, hey, we have to do less work here at home, we don't have to separate our glass?
Well, that's what I'm asking. So it was to try and get higher participation rates? Or?
Yeah, because again,
they got rebates
like in Florida, they do get rebates, So there's going to be less going to the landfill that they have to pay for out of their budget, and they're going to get rebates for the material that goes to recycling. So we can pay to get rid of it, or we can get paid for it. That was the way they looked from a budgetary standpoint. And from a compliance to the 75% goal standpoint, we're going to divert more away from the landfill with single stream.
Why is that true? If you had, how does multi-stream versus single stream necessarily divert more or less? Because there's less compliance, or there's less involvement from the municipality. They just won't do it.
Well, the idea is, from the municipality standpoint, the residents are going to be more compliant.
That's why. Okay, so they'll get more materials.
More participative.
More participation.
If you tell them, you just have this one recycling bin, you don't have
Dump
to
everything
just
in.
put it
Okay,
all
so
in.
that was, so municipalities perceived it to be a way to get higher participation rates, to get more in the streams, literally, no matter, they don't, you know. And then
if
you
you have
thought
to-
it would be easier mostly because of the collection.
And if you have the bigger bins, more fits in there.
Oh yeah,
rather
it's
than
clear
those
from the
little
collection
bins.
point of view that.
Well, even for the municipalities, they might think that, hey, our residents, if it's
Right,
easier,
less
they can
burden.
fit more in there.
Right.
Better for everyone.
It just seems odd that they wouldn't have started there. Why they would have started on the dual route if no one led them there.
Well, I remember, not that it matters, many years ago, there used to be places where you could take bottles in the old, I think, remember when the oil embargo and stuff, people started to recycle. Even like Michigan and other states had 10 cents a
5 cents,
bottle,
yeah.
things like that.
is
So
still
they would
there
already
today.
start
5
separating
cents.
bottles and aluminum
Cans.
because those would be recycling. And I'm thinking it probably just continued out of that. You have bottles because we've been collecting bottles separately, and then you have aluminum cans that are separate, and then you have, then the only thing we haven't really been talking about as much is paper and fiber. It's like, well, to me that, I don't know if that's, it seems, but that was in place before all of this, right? Yeah. So that's interesting. So do you know how any of that sort of affected this in your point of view? Do you think it had any impact? In other words, what we were doing, there was, deposits on bottles and before 1995, back in 1970, I remember in 1970 we had deposits on bottles and stuff.
Did every
Do
state
you think
do
that-
though?
Would so that's not really in there? That's not considered recycling? Or I'm just curious how do you view that?
This is about single stream recycling.
Oh, just single stream?
Yeah.
Okay. So that doesn't really reflect total recycling? Okay.
It could
Specific
be-
to this phenomena we call single stream recycling.
Yeah.
Okay.
It's driving a whole lot of change in our industry.
It could be that the dual stream could have been because back then they couldn't recycle certain items because there was
They
just
didn't
no manufacturer that uses those items in recycling at all.
There's no
It wasn't
infrastructure really to
exactly.
Or
Yeah.
even like the machinery wasn't
Exactly.
there
Yeah.
that would pick
Okay.
everything out.
That's right.
So it wasn't until
Technology.
now where they're like, hey, we can recycle this now. We can recycle cardboard now, or what have you.
So would you say one of the most interesting challenges right now is the whole contamination issue? Or is that?
Oh yeah.
Good. That's one of our questions. That's why yes. Okay. What about the most interesting decision? That's one of the questions too. Your current challenges are contamination. Maybe that's the most interesting decision. Now
auditing
that would be
stuff.
from a waste management. So part of this is good. You're giving us a background of the industry. At some points we need to kind of bring it into a waste management, and that's why I said, when did waste management enter this, and how did it affect them, and what were the decisions? So they opted in the late 90s. They had their little engineering thing for about 10 years, which sort of proved out and therefore wasn't necessary and was reabsorbed, and it's still going, I guess, but it's more embedded.
More integrated.
More integrated,
business
okay.
model.
So let's see. I'm trying to get these in some reasonable.
Most interesting decision, John. I don't know if you would consider that to be the inbound auditing. I think that's pretty recent, and it's a big decision that was made. That's kind of going across a lot of MRFs now. Would you consider that an interesting decision?
And
I
how
do.
did that arise, too?
Because of the contamination problem.
So,
Basically, when the trucks come and they dump they dump recyclable material,
Mhm.
that would get collected and put into our single stream, right? So I guess there was notice of, wow, we're getting a lot of stuff that isn't recyclable, just people just put in the bins, so now they're going through the system and they're damaging equipment, they're taking a lot of time and resources, and we have to pay a lot more people to sort through it to make sure that we have a clean plastic, so then we can sell that plastic.
Yeah.
So John actually put
So
together an
increasing
auditing
costs.
system. Right.
So the that's
So contamination.
and the most interesting decision was the decision to start sampling, to start characterizing your incoming stream.
Internal audit.
I would
Or,
say
I don't know.
that,
I'm asking.
Inbound
yeah,
auditing.
that's
Yeah.
a most interesting decision. To say if it's the most interesting.
Well,
that's-
right
I don't
now
know.
it is.
Or just pick out some as you go and say,
Yeah.
what were interesting.
I think as far as what's impacted this site, and I think what holds the most potential, for recycling operations similar to ours to change the industry is around that auditing, that sampling
Mhm.
of material, both on the inbound and on the
Mhm.
outbound streams.
I think the inbound is a little bit more sophisticated. I don't think that's the right word, but I think it's more. It makes more of a difference because it's what's coming in. So we get to see exactly what are our trucks really bringing in from those, houses that are picking up the recycling material. So we immediately get someone
One's a measure of your
to view
customer,
it.
one's a measure of you.
Yeah, one's a
Yeah,
measure of the
one's a-
process, one's a measure of the material. that
Right.
we're
Yeah.
seeing.
Yeah.
They have different purposes.
Yeah. Exactly.
And, I can't say one's less critical. As a MRF manager, when I was brought here from outside of the industry, as a manufacturing person that managed processes, a key measure for me, especially in a really big company, a lot of times I didn't have profit and loss responsibility. I had how many widgets did I make this month, and what was my, not necessarily labor cost even, how many people did I use or how many labor hours. But quality measures were real important. When when I worked for a company that was a supplier to the automotive industry, a key measure as a manager was your quality record, and not so much profit and loss, because you were making a component within a larger assembly, so it was real hard to even track your costs.
That was
So you really, as a manager, you really were focused on process and gave little thought to the expense side of things. In this environment, and it was almost the opposite. So I came into this site. It's tracked as a business unit. It has its profit and loss. It's looked at very closely all throughout the month, including the end of the month, and communicated all the way up to the top of the company. Then you do a report at the end of the week after to explain what all happened in hindsight, and then you're immediately forecasting the next month for your profit and loss stuff. So that's all one of the most important measurements, I'll say, within our organization, is that control of expenses and
Especially since you're so close to the break-even point.
yeah, certainly. But even
But
so,
even still, it's still.
even so, we were very accounting focused
Okay.
and not process focused. So, when I came in, I started looking around. Well, I'm trying to figure out, are we running it the right way? Well, I can't look at the end of the month and see how much money we made to say, did we do a good job? I mean, that's no way to run a business. So, I'm trying to find out, how do I get my hands around this? And as I'm digging in, I'm not seeing any metrics whatsoever, except for how many bales we produced in a given day. But that still wasn't enough, finite kind of analysis of what's going on there. So what I started looking for was, how can I tell in my paper, for instance, what percent of it is actually paper? Once I separate all this big pile of mess, how good a job did I do separating paper out of the plastic, and the plastic out of the paper, and the aluminum goes into the aluminum, and we really didn't have a method for that. So, the idea to say, well, let's start by measuring, take a bale, break it apart, and then weigh everything, and then really come up with some measure that we could look at on a daily basis to tell how well our equipment's being adjusted, what impact different material may have, and that that was that generated enough information that was not necessarily real time but timely, that we would be able to make adjustments to our process or equipment repairs, things like that, more promptly.
So you're using an understanding of what quality is to help get you toward your P&L goals.
And that created the next important hurdle, and it's one that we're challenged with even today, is so I call the person in charge of our material sales, and I say I'm looking for specifications for my different commodities. So now that I can measure it, and I'm trying to know what's good, what's bad. He says, well, I'll come by and take a look at it. I'll meet with you. So he comes by and looks at it. Oh, this is real good. I say, okay, good. But to quantify that, what would that be? Oh, well.
I don't know.
So he kind of threw out some kind of loose numbers for me. So I
Are
said,
these
well,
actually your consumers, or are they middle
the
people?
person I'm talking about is a waste management employee who's in charge of negotiating the contracts and managing customer relations.
For what?
Oh, with municipalities,
what you
not for
guys-
your buyers of your
Okay.
process.
So our product basically,
So at
we
this
have
point in the
someone
discussion,
that
you can
talks
at this
to the
point in the
customers
discussion
to
you
sell
can
it.
forget all
Yeah,
about
so
the
the final
municipality.
product.
Yes.
Yeah,
Oh,
so
okay,
it's
so
not
not
the
the
municipality.
municipality.
No.
It's
So,
the person
so at this
buying
point,
it.
forget
Right.
about the municipality.
Okay.
Yeah,
that's
The
what I
this
was
is the
municipality-
end of the process.
Yeah.
The beginning
And
is,
consumer.
what we get
At this
from
point,
the
I
houses
won't call the
and-
municipality a customer anymore.
They're more like the
They're
supplier.
really a supplier in
Yeah.
the supply chain.
That's right.
right.
Yeah.
But in a really perverted world of supply
They get money
chains,
back, yeah.
convoluted.
Yeah.
So yes, I think of them as a supplier. They think of us as their supplier. I think service
It's
provider.
because they don't know any better. They don't know. They think that,
They
we
think
take their
it's
recycling
ed.
It's a
material
strange
and we make
relationship.
things here. That's
Yeah,
not.
they don't understand the
That's
rest
not
of the
exactly
process.
what we do.
Yeah.
Exactly.
So the revenue from the recycler doesn't come from the person giving you the material. Your revenue
Mhm.
comes from
Right.
selling this product that has to meet a specification. So that's where I'm trying to get is, who buys the paper? Well, that's a paper mill in China. So, I'm trying to arrange a dialogue with a
Right.
representative so I can say what's good.
What do you need? Right.
And the answer I get is you're not going to get that answer.
Really? Still, or historically?
Ever.
Still.
So you can have
Are there any so there's no commodity type exchanges or anything that
Yeah.
there aren't,
there are commodity exchanges.
but that doesn't matter because you don't sell it through the exchanges, or you sell them direct.
We sell direct.
Ah,
There are, when I say commodity exchanges, there are networks of brokers who sell to mills in China
right.
for paper. Now, there's different commodities, so it's not all, the answer isn't the same for every commodity. But
Okay.
we'll use China as an example. So with China, Waste Management has certain business sales sales representatives who manage relations with these companies.
Wine and dine them.
They do all that stuff, golf, whatever you got to do. But keep them happy. And the other thing is they, gather the bookings for the volume. So those mills are looking for volume of material, huge volumes, to supply all the packaging and cardboard and things that are needed for the U.S. market for retail packages. Every cardboard box has to be made somewhere. Most of that's made in China. A lot of those cardboard boxes have been here before. They've been recycled. Components of it, the little curly stuff inside the metal that's what they make out of that paper that comes from it. But out of that process, from a quality standpoint, it's a very immature kind of industry or market. So the normal situation where they would say, here's our specification, you meet that specification, you have a lot of products, doesn't exist. There's an organization called ISRI, ISRI, and it's the Institute for Recycling, International Society
There you
for
go.
Recycling Institute.
There you go.
So-
You said institute first.
Yeah, sure. ISRI
International.
has the specifications for literally every kind of scrap material you can think of. And it tells you how much is allowable as a contaminant, how much is,
But
tolerated.
is that assumed for a certain customer consume, for a certain purpose, right? In other words, its value is this. If that X uses it, or not value, its specification is X for this use, it's Y for that use and Z for that use.
No,
No.
it's generally not.
Oh, really?
It's
It's
not
just
yeah,
it's
nothing
just saying
exists.
paper is considered quality.
Right, yeah.
Yeah.
Oh,
It's here's the standard. It's 1% contamination or 2% of another type of fiber. It explains all that out. for every type of waste paper grade. But well, what China has done is, because of a need, or let's say for demand, is they've said, well, we're not going to hold you to that ISRI standard because we just need paper, and if we did that, we wouldn't have
So
enough
we're just going to
supply.
blend it all together anyway.
Right. So
Is that
basically,
right?
like that standard doesn't matter.
So they're not interested in strictly grade X paper. They're looking at a range of grades that they're just going to throw in.
Yeah.
Or is that
Yeah.
sort of?
That's pretty much true. What they've had to do is, in their plant, they've had to design processes which will accommodate something less than that ISRI standard to work for them. And they've been able to do that at a price which was lower than using virgin pulp wood,
Right.
and with current energy costs and all that. So, they've basically compromised those ISRI standards. But they never really put into a specification to say, instead of the ISRI standard, you can have 5% and 12%.
Yeah.
Oh.
What they basically do is they continue to write contracts that say follow the ISRI standard, and then they accept anything less than that. That's a trap I've been in many times in my working career.
Yeah.
And it's also, it's one of those things that a supplier can fall into a deception on, because when you're working with a customer and the customer says, we don't need drawings, we don't need the specifications. What you're making is perfectly good for me, don't worry about it, it's good. Or if they give you a part like this and they say, I don't have drawings for this, but make me one, make me a mold that'll make these, just like this. It's a terrible road to go down, because what it means is you open the door to a breach of contract for anything you provide them, because at any time they can tell you that's not good enough, and that
Yeah.
handshake or whatever you were going on leaves you completely exposed. And that's kind of how our entire industry is working as a supplier right now to China, is at any time, every single load they ship you at any time.
Crapshoot.
It could be better than any load you've ever sent them, but they could at any time still say, that's not good
No.
enough.
Now, is that
It doesn't
only
meet the
right
standard."
now in terms of certain commodities? Is it paper and fiber, or just, because those are the ones you normally, it's not, is it plastics also?
It's mostly true in every commodity. We produce aluminum for Alcoa, for instance. Alcoa said their allowance is zero contamination. Zero contamination.
How possible do you think that is?
Essentially.
Yeah, but then you're signing to that, though. I mean, can't you?
Yeah.
So they have the right to reject a
Which
lot
means
if they
they
find
can-
anything.
Yeah, but
Which
then
means
don't,
they can
then
say,
they
oh,
don't
this is
sign it
zero.
because they're not going to
Downgrade
get
it.
it from anyone.
But we need customers,
Yeah,
Yeah, but they
flat
would
out,
never.
they can do
They
whatever
can't
they
get
want.
zero
Reject it flat
contamination
out,
from anyone.
which puts you in a
Somebody
situation
else
of
will sign
saying,
it though.
well,
Mhm.
But then they'll breach it.
what price
so-
would you pay for it?
If
'Cause I
they're
don't wanna
holding
pay
to
to ship
them,
it
then
all
they
the way
breach
back.
and they don't pay them. So why would you put yourself
Well,
And
they
it
haven't
does
done it yet,
happen
so.
in surplus conditions.
if
Thing
that's
is,
what the true
The
condition
thing
is.
is that you're putting them in the situation because you can accept it.
Yeah, but
as
you're
a
the one
company.
demanding. That's what I'm trying to say. You're the one demanding
But they're not
the
really
zero.
demanding it.
But they're
They
doing it
can.
so they can
They do
say,
it on
I don't
paper,
have to
but-
pay you
yeah.
because I can take
Yeah.
you to court and not
So
have
it's
to
not
pay
just
you.
the Chinese, it's also the U.S. from Alcoa, right?
Yeah, I was explaining that Alcoa, a very reputable automotive supplier. They make aluminum cans for beverages. The biggest, there's one other company bigger than Alcoa, they're an international company, I forgot the name. We don't do business with them. But Alcoa is certainly the biggest in the United States. We ship to one of their plants, two of their plants in Tennessee. There's also Budweiser and Anheuser-Busch in Alabama that buys aluminum cans. So Alcoa's spec, the first time I had a load rejected, I was like, I think it was about 1.5% was non-aluminum cans in that load. And so when I asked what is the spec, they said zero. So I mean, this is recycled garbage can. I mean, what about the sugars in it? Well, you can't count that. Oh, okay.
So that's not a
Uh-huh.
contaminant. So have they even specified what a contaminant is? To know,
Anything is not aluminum can.
But not the sugar.
so sugar is, they could reject it based on
Not the one
organic,
ant
not
that got
just-
into
not
you.
just-
The sugar.
They could.
In theory. But I mean, I still had plastic bottles. I still had some contaminants in it. So I worked in my process, covered my silos, did things, with the machine itself, had
Right.
sorters looking at it more closely and did some things like that. And then I had less than 1%. And when I did that, they said, well, that's fine.
But it wasn't
It
zero.
wasn't zero. It was still more than zero.
1% by weight?
Yeah, 1% by weight. So they were okay with that. And so then the spring, I get a complaint, and so they sent me basically like a corrective action. And nobody else asked for corrective actions, by the way. That's except Alcoa, and I think it's because they're not an automotive supplier. But the other customers aren't that sophisticated to do that. They just ask.
Yeah, well, they also might be not
Well,
be able to
they
measure it in the
ask for you
same
to
type
knock
of way.
money off the price. Is what they do.
They're like 50%
So-
off.
Yeah, so as far as Alcoa, this last one, I said, well, can you give me the breakdown of what the contaminants were? Well, the contaminants were actually 150 pounds of dust and some paper fiber and stuff that was in it. It was 150 pounds on a 20-ton load, so I was like well below 0.5%. It was better than ever I've shipped them, and yet they rejected it. It almost seemed arbitrary. But it still wasn't 0%, so from a negotiation standpoint, you're back in that same
Jeez.
barrel. Now what happened this year that's different, and this is one of these back and forths that keeps happening in recycling, is that surplus inventory situation. So when there's a glut of supply, or the dynamic shift where they can get a virgin material cheaper than your raw material, then they tighten up on the quality standards and they try to negotiate lower prices. So in this year, that came into this year selling aluminum cans at about $1,400 a ton. Now it's down around $1,000 a ton. That's a big difference, when you're trying to manage costs and all that. You can't.
But they're still, and are they still being more picky, even at the lower cost?
It always is that way. When there's a shortage of supply and high demand, the price goes up and the quality expectation goes down.
They'll take it at that point
Oh.
because they need it.
Yeah.
And
take whatever
because
they
the price
get.
is cheaper than they usually
So
pay.
the lower the
It's a little
price, the
cheaper,
higher the
so,
quality
yeah, it's
expectation
fine,
is.
Yeah. So if you go to the grocery and your significant other says, be sure and pick up an avocado. We have to have an avocado. We've got people coming over. We're making guacamole. Do not come home without an avocado. Okay, you go there during avocado season. There's an abundance of avocados, right? And they're cheap. They're half the price. So what do? You just go grab any of them, or you start looking, right? And what do? You find the very best avocado. And you got ample selection, and you're passing over many avocados that were perfectly good avocados, and you're getting it for half the price. But in the other situation, now they're out of season. Now they're shipping them from Chile or someplace, right? You go there, there's one avocado, and it's like kind of wrinkled up, and they want $4 for it or something, right? But you still go home with this wrinkled up avocado that's all black, and take it and say, I don't know, here it is.
It's the best
it
they could
was
do.
$4.
Okay.
That's the way it works with the commodities that we're talking about. So even though I get less for my money, I have to put more cost into
Right.
making a better quality or better process control. Not necessarily have to spend more to do it, but I definitely.
If you relate this back to your experiences, like with automotive and supply management and things like that, when you have like source inspection things where people can come to your plant and sign things off, and the evolution of certified suppliers and all that, where the concept of what is quality and as a basis based on a specification, and then the ability to then eliminate or reduce inspection at the house and then get it to the supplier and work toward more. It sounds like it's if I try to compare where that evolution is, it sounds like you're in the real baby stage. But is there any vision of actually working toward? Would it even make sense in your mind to work toward the same type of a supplier management scheme that you've been familiar with in automotive or any other type of industry?
Yes, I think that will happen.
It's just going to take time to shake out, or?
I think it will. I've seen iterations within our own company of recognition of management systems in other industries at work. There's a certain migration of people from other industries that come into these companies. We had a significant they call a VERP or whatever, voluntary retirement program last year, where a lot of very senior people from this industry, 30, 40 years, retired. And so, people have come into this industry. The gentleman out here that I introduced you that I said was a trainer, running around looking to put together training programs for us, is a person who comes out of the other industry, of the petroleum industry. So as there's more of that type of interchange, the people are going to be looking to apply certain solutions. There's a thrust right now that actually Carolina's participated in for standardization of certain common
instructions.
guidelines or work instructions for different MRFs. So they've been like forwarding these around. We've been reviewing and editing and adding our comments and forwarding it back so that we can create a consolidated standard operating procedure, for a management system within the company.
Because you see that helping in spite of where you are in the variability in your customer acceptance right now. It's still the right thing to do. I'm just trying to match your vision of quality management within house to the expectation of what quality is from your customer's point of view in that interaction. Obviously that interaction is kind of weird right now and it's very immature. Does your quality system in-house doesn't necessarily have to be, well, hopefully it's at least at or above par with what you would consider you're going for, because then you can, I'm guessing you can shoot ahead of the duck. You know where these things probably are going to head, right? You believe that it's probably going to head toward a normal type of supply-based management that's proven in industry, right? So you could use that as a way to say, where are, in your own maturity model, if you are, you can say this is where we are, and you probably can assess where your customers are, and try and get a feel for, what's the right plan, and maybe even, I don't know about timing, if you found the timing to be similar to, or if anyone's even looked at the timing it takes for not only your firm, but also your customers to mature based on new industries. Because we've gone through this in different types of, high tech and things like that, when we found new industries springing up, and you have the same, something similar kind of playing out, I would guess.
I don't know. That's really a tough one, and here's why. It's been my experience that as a supplier, you never are better than your customer expectations.
Right.
And for many reasons, but it's that requirement of your customer, to challenge you, to improve your quality or your process, to meet their specifications, to drive down cost. That's what keeps companies evolving. And when a company's in a niche where they don't have that customer competitive situation or whatever it is, they don't progress, they don't evolve, they don't make those kind of advances from a management system standpoint. So there's some big questions to be answered that have to do with really a global equation. Here's an example right now. China's GDP decreased last year. It was double digits. This year it's 7.5% or something like that year to date. And we've felt repercussions of that within North America's waste industry that exports to China. But yet our own exports of paper have shrunk by 4%. So it's less than the shrinkage of the GDP in China, or even their consumption of paper. So, there's some other missing pieces there. And one of the things that came out from a person I heard is a senior economist for an organization that analyzes pulp and paper wood and recycling. She said in a presentation she did in Chicago last week that we had a West Coast strike. You may have heard a little bit about it on the news, but for the most part, it kind of happened. If you're on the East Coast, people didn't hear much about it, but the entire Pacific coast was shut down from any kind of export trade all of the last half of last year and the first half of this year, up until about the first quarter of this year. And nothing was shipped out of the West Coast. So any kind of products that were going to or from China had to go through Panama Canal or some other route in order to get it shipped or consumed domestically. There were vast amounts of recycled materials just accumulated on the West Coast. It didn't make sense to ship them all over the country. There weren't domestic markets for it, so they basically just stockpiled it on the West Coast, let that stuff sit. Some of it's perishable and didn't make it very well. Some of it got shipped, a lot of it. But what happened in that time frame, though, was China had enough demand that they still needed a supply, which was not being met by North America. So they established or improved supply chains that they had in Europe and what they call Oceania. Do you know what that's? It's a term I hadn't seen presented before. Oceania being the Pacific Rim and the islands, in Australia, that kind of whole area. So they created supply chains to China for recycled paper from Oceania and from Europe. And now that that strike's over, they still have those established relationships. And one of the things that's happened this year is the US dollar has become stronger than the euro. That's not good in this situation. So in this scenario, what it means is that,
Exactly.
yeah, well, a couple things happen. The price of oil goes down too when the US dollar is strong. So the price of oil went down, which means energy costs are very low for things like making new aluminum, making new
Right.
plastics, and
So
all
they'll
that,
be making more.
including the raw material to make the plastics. And as far as China's concerned, if they're going to be buying recycled paper, they can buy it from, at the euro price, or they can buy it with US dollars. So there's no incentive for them to come back to North America for those tons where the volumes are being met already through contracts in Europe. So it shifted globally, part of the demand on the paper. So these are, to answer your question, it's hard to predict those kinds of things that can occur.
Sure.
But I do think every time we're tested that way, every time the quality requirement gets tighter, anytime there's a surplus, the more competitive it is, whether it's with Asia or with Europe, it will challenge anybody who's in this business to get better at it.
Yeah, exactly.
And to get better at it means to go back to the principles, that have worked in any industry, and that's focusing on process improvement, looking at what Deming, taught us about continuous improvement, and even the modern evolution of that, which is incorporating lean processes, eliminating waste wherever you can find it in the process.
Okay, so there's still enough potential to still compete if you're innovative.
Absolutely.
Okay.
I have a question about standardization. Where did that idea come from, that decision that we should standardize across the different MRFs?
I don't know. I think that companies tend to do that anyway. I mean, it tends to make sense.
How independent are they of each other, though?
They're very independent, and this is a big company. So what you have is a person that's in a very high level position, and what he sees is, I've got a MRF in this part of the country that when I go there, they've got processes in place, they're making money, I don't have problems there, it seems to work well, and there may be acquisitions that we've made, or even just MRFs in other parts of the country that are struggling, every month just to keep employees or to keep in a profitable situation.
Now, the standard is just to be profitable. Profit and loss, that's what they look at ultimately.
It's more of a way of finding improvement areas, because right now there is no standard, so it's kind of like, well, how do we know we're doing okay?
Yeah.
We have nothing to compare it to, and even if we compare it to last month or the month before, that who's to say that's the standard, or that's where we need
That's
to be.
kind of the
That's
only
the
standard.
best we
Are
can
you
do.
profitable or not? As far as
No, it's not the only standard.
overall,
It's not the only standard. It's the
between
one.
all of them,
It's
I
the
mean?
one that hits you in the perks. So when you're looking for a standard, what you're looking for, when I mean that, I'm talking about standard processes, standardized systems that support processes.
but none of that really exists between all of the different MRFs.
There are some
right now?
systems that exist that are uniform, and then there are others that are not. The ones that tend to be uniform are things like,
Safety, probably.
well, safety is absolutely one that's uniform more than anything else. It's one thing this company does really well, and it's the best model they have internally to emulate in order to make improvements in other areas. And I say that, for instance, because their safety program, without really seemingly able, there's not evidence that we have people at a very high level here who understood things like the continuous improvement culture, the communications required for supporting continuous improvement, the employee engagement piece of it, that you're basically bringing the problems to the level of people doing the work and engaging them so they're even self-directed in a lot of their decision making, and aligning that with whatever your corporate goals are. That's an ideal model for continuous improvement in a big company. They did that in safety, almost exactly by the book. So,
But there's still areas that even need improvement in safety. So it's kind of
Sure.
like, yeah. So it's kind of like, yeah, we do have, I guess, some standardized processes, but even those could still need more like work.
but from the standpoint of like our safety, we're a leader in our industry. There's numerous high-level calls, people at the highest level of our company. There's a position for that person, a vice president of safety. There's a market area, a manager of safety, all over the country. There's conference calls that are held every week around safety. There's bulletins that are sent out whenever there's like a truck accident. So we learn best practices and we learn what mistakes from each other's, all around the country. There's materials, there's a calendar set out, there's materials that are handed out to managers to follow, for training and education. There's all types of resources that I can pick up a phone and I can have somebody here to help me with safety training. And then there's a very elaborate tracking software company we use that tracks all our safety training. And then we have a safety team on site that are, it's a self-directed safety team. They come up and identify problems, and they meet each month, come up with suggestions and all that. So that same model you can use in continuous improvement and just focus on things that are not safety, and
Process.
in addition to having people working on safety.
How dependent is the safety outcomes to the standardization of your processes? In other words, the fraction materials that are handled by hand, or all these, because you said you have acquisitions, unless you're just really lucky and all the equipment is really, really similar, and therefore a lot of the processes are highly similar. Are they really more similar or different if you go to these MRFs? Then I guess it's the waste management from the beginning, and then there's the acquisitions. I would assume the acquisitions are more likely to be dramatically different, or where's the variability in your equipment that would seem to have a big impact? Maintenance, safety, process control, knowledge, and all that stuff is, you learn about this in the context, I would guess, of how it's used.
That's right. And I mean, in general, MRF equipment is similar. There's different equipment used for different functions, and they're somewhat similar still in technology.
So everyone uses a baler at the end. Different types of
Everyone
balers.
uses a baler.
There are different
Everyone
types, though.
uses
Different types of balers,
conveyors.
right.
Everyone uses some type of sorting screen.
Okay.
And then there's optical sorters, and most
Right.
places are using some type of optical sorter. So that much of it is very standardized.
Okay.
As far as
In the industry, not just at Waste Management, because the acquisitions are using similar machines to what you are, because they've
Right.
proven out to be. Okay.
yeah, and there's again, you remember the chart saying there wasn't high volume single stream until the late mid 2000s. So the companies that build this equipment didn't exist either. They weren't building this stuff for 50 years. They're still figuring it out. And so, if we talk about an acquisition, we're talking about a company that was probably operating 2 or 3, 4 years, and
Right,
we
that's
bought
it.
them.
Right.
So it's pretty much the same equipment, the same vintage equipment, or some revision of that. It does change every year. They keep trying to.
So that would seem to be
improve things.
that should make things a lot easier in a lot of regards. Having that context of, you're only buying new stuff in general, whether you're putting it in yourself or the acquisitions, everything's essentially, you don't have old machines or there's not mixtures of dramatically different technologies or something in these sites as you get them. So it would seem like your safety programs therefore have a high probability of working, because it's very similar situations that they're being put in.
Well, safety programs have to be tailored to the site, definitely,
Right,
for
but-
different variations of equipment. And as far as an equipment that has to meet ANSI standards, it would all have to, meet a certain level of safety.
So all that gets assessed during the acquisition, and then they build the safety standards around for that site based on whatever equipment is
Yes,
there.
yes, that's right. Now, this particular site is probably one of the most diverse in its variety and vintage of equipment. We literally do have equipment here that's 20 years old. It was used in old dual stream operations, and it's still in use here. And we have equipment that's maybe 4 years old, our optical sorters or less. that are, you know, still pretty current technology. So it can be a hodgepodge of everything, but you can adapt your programs around that. From a standardization standpoint, though, even with that, there's certain practices like equipment inspection protocols where every day we're required to go out, and certain people in the production are required to look at the equipment, make sure that everything's functional. Anything that's not working or of concern, they note it on a checklist, and that gets reviewed by a maintenance manager, turns into a work order so that something gets fixed. Those are standardized processes you do across the board, but you do still have to tailor certain language in it, or, you know, equipment specific instructions.
I guess I'm interested in maybe two things. One is that if you can walk us through, because I'm trying to get a feel for how much of this should pivot around like you as a person here, or is it a waste management? And I'm not sure if it matters. In other words, how important, you know, we haven't, from a timeline here, okay, because when you came and talked in the class, it was, you know, somehow you came to them, there was someone was looking for someone with your skills, which implied there was an understanding that they needed someone with your skills. So I'm just trying, based on what you were talking about in your demand timeline, so was it the WMRA group that was figuring out what types of people that the MRF managers need to be? Or was that sort of one of the things they came up with? Well,
there started being a kind of a lot more cross communication in the last 5 years between those two groups. So, so there were people in, let's say, the conventional line of business that, you know, attended the same meetings as the people who were reporting in from the other lines of business. The profit and loss piece of the MRF, though, of the recycling, reported into the market area, which is all of the lines of business. So when I say there was a recycling group, the recycling group didn't have a P&L responsibility. They were more like this, group that were experts, and they helped with the sales. They had a head person who tried to come up with programs to support the recycling technology to make it work better and improve it. But the local market area vice president, which in the case of Florida is in Pompano, but they have all lines of business. Anything that has to do with waste management in the state of Florida is all under that one person's P&L. So they had vested interest in the success of the recycling piece of it, and to make sure
so that was a local decision. They decided that they needed a MRF manager with a certain skill set.
So it was really a local decision, and the reason how that came about in my case was the area director was familiar with another area director in another part of the country and the success he had had at a certain MRF. And it was all in the area of continuous improvement. So when you go to this plant, you see all these visuals that had been created that didn't exist in other MRF, signs, the way it was organized. He was talking about things like 5S,
right,
and Kaizen teams, and in different types of just continuous improvement type efforts, that methodologies that he had been putting in place. They were completely foreign. It was as if somebody landed from another, time in the future in a time capsule, and you had all the secrets, who's going to win the Super Bowl this year, that kind of thing. So it made an immediate impact on the success of that plant. Now, that didn't mean you didn't have to create a culture, get the right people in place, and do a lot of training to get people's mindset, but they had a leader there that understood that. So when they started looking in Florida, the communication, like to a recruiter, was find somebody with a similar skill set.
Now, do you know any of the background of that one place, that Genesis site?
The site itself, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, how'd this person get there? It's just by luck?
Yeah, they kind of screwed up and hired him.
Okay, well, that's interesting. Again,
it was. I'm sure I can't say if it was a mistake or by intent, but.
There was no job specification looking for those skills for the first one.
No.
It just happened that way, and then they said, well, let's do that again.
Yeah, it's kind of like the company in general is noticing what those people with those types of skill sets have is bringing to the company. So
By
then,
that one-
yeah.
by the
So
one
then,
example.
even like more recent employees, like you was talking about the guy that you met just now, who is doing a training, wants to do a training. Just like him, he's very recent too. It's kind of like, oh, we've had this
Now they're learning
realization.
how to do training
Right.
based on new types of people that have come in with training.
Right,
back-
exactly.
Well, that's true too, because a lot of the training I've criticized, I said, well, that's not how I've done training. You know, we did a pre-assessment, a post-assessment,
Right.
and just said, there it is. So there's a recognition that there's a formal process for that. But to follow suit, within Florida, the director that hired me has now hired a plant manager for our Tampa MRF. The guy came out of another industry, never worked in waste. All of his had been in like aerospace and
Mhm.
manufacturing in the Tampa Bay area. And then the person in our Orlando plant was hired out of Texas. He worked for Toyota down there. And so he's
Mhm.
well indoctrinated into it. So, and it's actually quite interesting because we'll be at a group meeting together and we'll be talking about something, and I might raise my hand. I might start talking about process failure mode effects analysis. I don't know if you guys.
Yeah.
Okay. So I'll be talking about that, and say, well, here's a better way to do this. If you identify all, what is the flow and all the potential failure modes, and then we can set up a risk priority, for each of these things, and then we can put controls in place to make sure they don't happen. Anyway, so after the end of the meeting, go over there and the guy comes, hey, John, come here, look. He's sketched out exactly what I was saying. He said, I was going to say the same thing. He said, I've actually been doing this. He showed me on his laptop. I've actually been doing this at my plant with my own process to put that in place. So, that's a mindset that has to do with recognizing that the process is important. I mean, that's what we're doing. At the end of the day, and that's what I've stressed is that, how do I know I've done my job as a MRF manager? If you strip away everything that a MRF manager does, the meetings you have, the employee discussions, all of that, it all comes down to the process. What adds value is there's material that comes in. If they could do it without any people here, including myself, we would dump it in a big hopper and it would come out little bells and robots that put on trucks and it would all go away. And that would be the core of our process. Not all of the collateral stuff we fill our days with, as managers and all that. Safety and all that, you wouldn't have these discussions. But it's not that that's the ideal, but it's always important to strip all that away and remember that that's the most important thing to our customer.
Right. That's all they wanted to pay for.
And focusing on that process is what steps in that process are adding value that we're converting this raw material into, a process that adds value that we can get revenue that we make money.
So sort of an organic process of one person runs into another, finds out about it, and then he came to a point where he said, I need a new MRF manager for who knows what reason, and decided, well, now I have an opportunity based on the realization or the thought or the
What's that
working
guy over there doing?
Was it a
Exactly.
new? Do you know the situation that created your position? Was this an acquisition, or was it somebody left, or they just
Yeah. It's some of those sensitive areas.
Well, I mean, you don't have to say if it.
They had unsuccessful managers
Okay.
in the role.
Okay, so the division manager, whoever this person, what was that person? Not name, but what was the title of that? The VP of that? Was it the VP?
Well, the VP now is who was also the VP then, was a guy named Tim Hawkins,
Uh-huh.
and so he was here at the time all this.
So he's the one who did the hire, or put in the.
No,
basically
actually,
the job.
there was actually be a person a level beneath him. In the first iterations, there were people here that came in from an acquisition, family-owned business,
Uh-huh.
and they were transferred in here because they should have known something about how to run MRF in a family-owned business. They really didn't know about single-stream
Okay.
MRFs.
But okay, so
So it was
so
like a
was the VP
director?
that actually put in the job description that got you here,
I don't know that that's true. I think it's the area director,
the area director.
Yeah.
So between those two,
but definitely a consensus between the two.
okay, so they were in cahoots.
Yeah.
In the good way. Okay, but it wasn't a directive from corporate. It
Right.
didn't sound like. It was just something that sounded right, and because they have P&L, it's like, hey, this works over here, and they have the ability. They don't have to do it. They can do it any way they want, right? As long as they make their numbers. So they decide now that so they went out and basically scoured for one, and you showed up. Okay, so it's based on the other plant. Do you know what that job description looked like that you were responding to?
Mhm.
It was just a recruiter found you. It'd be interesting to know how they spec'd it out. You know, what were the experiences, skills, and things? What did they look for? Then to see whether or not you were actually a perfect fit for that, or if you were just another lucky guess. You know, did they just want some? You know, I don't know. It'd be interesting. Do you know if you could get your hands on that, or is that something that might be too weird?
I doubt it.
Okay.
I really doubt it would be even available. The recruiter's not even with the company. They've
Right.
moved on.
But does that director or VP, did you have any psych?
Yeah, I mean, that's a conversation I can have with you.
If it's not awkward, it'd be interesting. I think just for the case to say this is how because when it comes down to it, and we're thinking about sustainment and things like that, and looking at job descriptions and what is quality and who does what is, you know, are you asking for what you want, and what are you actually getting, and that variance, and how's that managed, and all that. So it's germane to the case if it's available. It would be a nice thing to have. And then, because that can then be compared to job descriptions of your current and any evolution of job descriptions since you've been here, have you made any realizations that have actually parlayed into new job function definitions or anything? It's just an indication of more structure or something. It's another data point that a student could consider. And the converse is true. If all this is happening, but the job descriptions haven't changed, does that say something too? It could be a risk from an HR strategy point of view, because the next person that comes in may be a total non-fit because you never asked for something that you've now. It's almost like your quality definition. Well, yeah, this is good enough, but it was never specified. So the question is, are your requirements for the employees now being specified? Do they represent the learnings that you're getting through your journey as you go through? So it'd be interesting, like I said, to start with what yours look like, just because it'd be interesting. And then we can ask the question of what have your job descriptions been doing? So that would be, if you can. Okay, so that gives me a better feel for how you got here, because I never really knew that, and that I think could be really interesting and helpful in the case. What I think, because I don't want to spend tons of your time, is I just literally want to go down through these 22 questions and see if we have something that we. Okay, when we say quality management system, do you have one?
No.
Okay.
Does it hurt to say that?
Yes.
Well, okay, so then.
That's not one of the questions.
That was just a personal.
Do you need one, or what do you? Then perhaps what do you yearn for one? Do you want one, or what does that mean to you? You don't have a quality system, so.
I mean, there's just a couple ways that could be answered. One question would be yes, we obviously have a system. Is it a documented system? Is it thoroughly identified, you know, and fleshed out, and where responsibilities and roles are assigned? No.
Okay.
Do we have some methodology by where, you know, we control what goes out of here? In some sense, yes.
Okay, so we're going to want to get some detail on that, because part of, like in the first class, quality management class, talks about quality management systems. So putting that in perspective would be really important to appreciate, especially within where you are within your journey and what's going on here. What's the utility of what you have, what it is and what it isn't, and what do you think could be, or a student could be asked, well, if they had others, what other features of quality management systems could be brought to bear here to accomplish what sort of goals that the firm may have. So it'd be a good thing to challenge the students to say, okay, if they don't have one, what may be at risk, and what could they do with one, and what would it look like, and things like that. So to know where you're standing would be good.
Very good.
Okay, quality planning. How would you see that is done now? And I can throw out things, you know, some organizations have quality departments. Do you have a quality department?
No.
Okay. Who is accountable or responsible for quality in the plant?
The MRF manager and his direct
Minions.
reports that have assigned responsibility.
Basically, okay.
Yeah, right.
So relative to quality planning, from what I think I've heard you say, is you're integrating quality in highly because of utility toward getting your P&L, I would also guess that it has a huge impact in safety issues and things like that. Quality being more generally applied. But there are aspects of, what does quality planning even mean here? So you could look at how do you plan for quality here? What does that even mean? So part of it is, what is quality from your customer's point of view? And how does that impact the way you manage process and product quality? What is quality here from separate from what the customers perceive? In other words, what's process quality and maybe safety quality and other things that you would maybe argue are not really that impacted by what your customers are looking at, that you think are just important to, almost like infrastructure. So how does that quality plan, and then how do you administer it? How do you, when you said, it's your responsibility in the direct reports, like, how is quality in the jobs of the different people here? What jobs are they? Who does what? You have supervisors, you have, that whole stuff. What does quality mean here, and how is it deployed? And then relative to quality planning, we can say even from a tools point of view, do you sit down at any point and say, well, how are we going to deploy quality as a strategy going forward? Do you use like a QFD equivalent where you say, okay, this is what our outcomes are, these are our key initiatives, these are ongoing things we're doing, here's how we're going to deploy quality. So that's basically a question that we'd like some detail on, is how do you plan quality? How have you planned it? How is it embodied in what the structures and things? Does that make sense?
Yeah. Okay, you covered a whole lot of categories there.
I know. Well, it's a quality class.
With respect to like safety, and when we would say quality, it would be an assessment of, if we gave safety training, for instance, did people understand it? So we have certain types of safety training where people have to demonstrate back, that they understood the training.
Right.
We have observations that are done, and so there's like a routine process where the supervisor.
So you do audits, basically.
We'll go out and actually observe an employee doing their job to a certain criteria.
Do you have external audits or just internal?
We also have external audits, where Waste Management has people that's their primary role.
But that's still waste. Do you have like OSHA and other types of external audits that come in here?
Not intentionally.
But do you fall under any sort of regulatory audits that have whether they've shown up or not to date?
OSHA doesn't do it like a routine audit, but it's always a possibility, and they do visit waste management sites.
Okay.
But as far as, that's not something we would rely on to find out if we're...
No, but it's just curious, because whether or not, in other words, it brings up, is this a regulated industry?
It's regulated from the standpoint of worker safety.
Okay.
Yeah.
So that's why OSHA's there. So, but it's not like it's been a huge focus of OSHA to hang out at MRFs.
That's correct.
For whatever reason. Okay. Okay, so quality planning. So then I have quality in the workforce, and that's basically, I sort of brought it in with quality.
Jumping ahead though. So when you talk about quality, with the product and how it impacts the customer, we talked about that a little bit.
Right.
But nevertheless, I still have to make a product that the customer accepts. So even though they don't give me a criteria, I absolutely could get it rejected. And so there is some type of comprehension of what we think the customer wants. We have to control our process to meet that.
So you make the determination where you think it's acceptable or defective, as whether, like the dressing issue. That's as an example, it's like, does this thing look good enough to pass customs? Okay. You don't know. You try and take a reasonable shot at it, but there are other indications. So you shoot for what you perceive to be a specification at that.
So we have a system in place, to make each bell, meet the visual test to get through customs, which would be a quality, a regulatory type of restriction, as well as we do know that there are certain levels that would be untenable by the paper mill that buys our paper that they wouldn't accept. So we control the process by measuring through sampling and making adjustments to the equipment to keep it within that. We communicate those levels, to the people in charge of the process, so they understand where to maintain.
And you keep logs of that, so you know your trends of this. And even things like moisture content and things like that, you measure those on your outgoing products to try and know.
That's right.
Okay, so from a quality management system, you have documentation
Yeah.
in there.
A rudimentary system.
Right.
I mean, people come here and visit from other waste, sites, and they ooh and ah, they talk about all this wizardry we're doing. But I mean,
Compared to a normal manufacturer, come on.
But I come out of a highly kind of controlled environments where there's just layers and layers and layers of analytical measurements and stuff like that. So it's not even comparable on the same plane. But I have to tell myself that. And I've worked in small companies that are privately owned that didn't have quality systems. But you have to appreciate that as well, and you have to understand that it's always a matter of as much as I really love the process part of it, if money's no object, I could waste a lot of money just playing with processes and trying to understand them and analyze them and just using it as my playground. And I've done that before. When I was in a role with Siemens, I really didn't have to worry about the P&L stuff. So you do have a fiduciary responsibility. We're a publicly traded company. There are owners, there are stockholders that don't appreciate that. What they want you to do is make smart decisions, do it at the lowest cost possible, and move on. Not indulge yourself. So that's part of, I think, why we're where we're at in this industry. We've had a really abrupt shift in a lot of the economic conditions, of the expectations of our customer, that's made our industry move real fast. And so it just kind of brought us to where we're at, and I think we will continue evolving. Is what
But
that
you have a
trajectory
fair amount of
looks like.
autonomy at your sites because of the P&L, so I don't get the feeling that you get a lot of directives from a corporate level as to what you have. For instance, let's say quality planning. Do you have goals that are, other than maybe safety?
No, and to me, there's actually, as a corporation on the recycling piece, there's two big, silos, if you will, of control that are conspicuously missing. And one is the quality. There should be a VP of quality reporting at a very high level within the company. There's not. And so there's no infrastructure that really is
Even
around
within
quality.
recycling?
Even within recycling. That's just not.
So it's not there yet?
No.
And so it sounds like you believe that it may be there someday.
When I get to be the CEO, I promise you.
We'll be there.
There will be one. No, I don't know. I mean, I haven't heard any rumblings like that.
No.
But what I see are these attempts. They're cyclical every year or two to try to make this standardized, SOPs, to try to do continuous improvement. They'll hire a person in charge of continuous improvement. They'll go from site to site holding events to try to create the culture. But it needs to be driven from top down, just like the success we've had in our safety program with a person at that high level. You need that person at that high level on a senior leadership team. And that goes back to, you pick up any book, they're going to say it starts at the top. That's how you create
Okay, so that would, in the case, we can draw the analogies to your safety program, and have the students make comparisons to see maybe the effects, or how important is it to have the, if you have P&L responsibility at this level, why do you need any support above that level? What would you get from it, for example? Okay. So what you're not getting right now is you're not seeing any leverage of standardization or incentives to go across above the P&L level to really, you're doing it informally, it sounds like, because it's best for, it's good to collaborate and it's good for both of you, but there's really no corporate push or coordination to try and make that happen, or control. There's no mandates that say this is what's going to happen, like there is in safety.
That's
Okay. Quality in the workforce. So everything from training of the workforce in anything like quality tools awareness, is there something that you would be able to give us to sort of, this is what our how they're trained in what level of quality, what sort of awareness do they get? Do they have, like, what do you do with them?
Depends on really what the tasks are.
Okay.
So, if I'll start at like a high level, maintenance person, for instance, they have already some training outside of the company in that discipline. When they come in, there's a regimen of things that they're going to be exposed to that have to do with safety, you know, lockout, tagout,
Right.
arc flash, and all that. But then there's also certain disciplines that, like are in our, we have something called WMU. They can go in, they can look at, like English and Spanish, and go through certain courses that
Okay.
teach them about certain disciplines that have to do with like electrical, pneumatics, and hydraulics, and all that, as well as our own kind of an on-the-job training little menu we put together, or a matrix for a person here at this site. For a person that's a loader operator, or let's say a forklift driver, also there's something like a roll-off truck driver, as well as in the other lines of business, the route drivers that pick up garbage and all that stuff. We have a training center in Fort Myers, so a person would go over there for like 2 weeks.
Right.
And they would go through all kind of classroom training as well as hands-on training, driving vehicles, and then you have to demonstrate that, before they pass that training.
Do that, so they get like a certification, internal certification or something?
Yeah.
They have a job skill certification?
That's right. And then they're allowed to go, be released to that position to be able to work it.
Does process improvement type stuff, is that in any of these types of training? Okay. At any level?
What about in the sampling process with the sorters? Like the individual sorters.
Training for that.
Yeah, there's a WMU training for that. Did you see that yet?
I did.
Okay. Why don't you tell them about that, because you're probably more familiar with me than I am on that.
There's an online training that you have to do. They actually make you finish a test and they give you a certificate, which I have now. You basically go through all the motions of what you would do as the person sampling, auditing. Also specifics on the types of material that you're dealing with. So it's kind of like, okay, I know what type of plastic this is, I know this is aluminum, I know this is paper, I know this is cardboard. And how that process goes, where you would put this plastic, does it go in this bin or this bin? And then what you write down, the weight, how you weigh it, everything. It goes through all the details of that, and it's online, and you take a test online.
And it's
But that's sampling
mandatory
programs
for
here,
the
I thought.
sorters?
Yeah, it's mandatory for anybody that's going to be involved in that waste sampling.
Which is just here. Just something you're doing.
Yeah, we
this
do that
site.
here, but we've also rolled that out, to other sites. So we've got, there's a software behind that came in parallel with what I was doing here. So there's other sites that are doing waste sampling across the country. This one just happens to be like exponentially more, numbers of audits that we've done. We've done thousands of audits versus maybe other places. Like this year alone, I've done, just on the, I forget, on the O&P.
Well, I know in August, because I was doing some graphs for it, we did at least 34 audits. So that's just 1 month. So then you can imagine a year
On
and
just
however
the
many
inbound
years.
audits.
Right, and that's
Yeah.
just inbound, exactly.
But like for our O&P, we're doing like one every shift, so it's like 10 times more than say our Tampa would have done in the same year.
Well, that's a job relative to
It's a specific task.
a specific
Right,
task.
so
site.
that's a
there's
training
training
for-
around that.
right.
I'm kind of working through some different
Yeah.
jobs. There's there's like our bell dressers. So that's a site-specific training we created.
Right.
So they have, they're demonstrating what the right technique to do what they're looking for, and then they have to prove that back, at
Right.
the end of that. When you get into really the entry-level position, that's the sorter on the line. It's all about safety. All the
Right.
training is around that, and then there's a video that they're shown. And then as far as the actual work on the line, that's given by the plant lead.
Okay, so let's talk about like the on-the-line manual sorter person. Do they talk about concepts of what is quality, how to improve process?
Well, how that would translate for their task is they would say, things like, depending on the position, if they're on a pre-sort conveyor, then their role would be, to look for items, and it might be a specific item they might be assigned to based on their position on the conveyor.
Right.
But they would be told that your job is to make sure you pull off, big pieces
Big
of
old
film,
stuff. Right.
and that your level of performance needs to be at like 30 per minute. Would be the number, 30 pieces per every 2 seconds. You should be pulling something off.
Because you expect it to be at least that much in the mix.
Yeah. And actually, there is.
Oh, yeah.
So there's no shortage of that. The thing is, sometimes it's hard to meet those. That should be an average, but it can be hard to meet that because of just the size of some of the items that come in
Yeah.
and the contamination.
But do they, so they're talked with the task, but did they talked about, what is, how to, in other words, even, let's say, relative safely, how to be aware of and look for anomalies and look how to improve and how to better the process, how to improve the safety, how to learn, if I'm handling all these big ass bags, maybe there's a better way to handle it. Is that part of my job or part of a quality training so I know that it's important here that I'm looked as being one of the contributors to making things better.
It's a training need across the board for the sorter position.
So it's just inherent in the position, like if you see opportunity to improve this, speak up about it.
That's already communicated. In fact, that's communicated on a regular basis. Yeah. We have something that's a pre-shift huddle where we
that's just here, or is this across the waste management?
That's pretty much across waste management. I won't say it's a formal program, so it probably does vary with sites.
Okay, so that's quality and workforce would be if it's not in the task training, but it's done in the pre-shift huddles where you're enforcing communication and safety.
Well, yeah, part of that's in a broad sense, but really specific to that worker, to his task, it's a need that we need to identify as a training opportunity.
But what about, if they're doing what you're asking them to do, but who looks to improve the processes? Is it other people, or do you ask the operators, and how do you ask the operators for suggestions to make things better?
All right, well, we've got a process. I don't think I have an example here. We've got a process we call Opportunity Knocks.
Okay.
And basically it's a card.
Suggestion?
It's a suggestion card a person can fill out. It's different. It's a different innovation on it. I mean, I've been struggling for years to find out what's the best way to engage, get people's ideas.
Right.
You can have meetings, you can have a number of things. There are people who will never talk up in a meeting. There are people that's not going to work for. But the problem with the card in a suggestion box is they put it in the box and they never hear back.
Right.
Yeah,
what happened, or they don't know the status. Maybe it takes 4 months to implement it, and the whole time they're left in the dark. So this Opportunity Knocks board, we call it, is a multicolored board. It's got different zones. The first one being, for the new card. So a person can fill out, or they can have someone write it for them if they can't write. We have employees here that can't write, so they can put that suggestion on it. They can put it in that first category, and then it's waiting for review. The next category, it doesn't disappear into an office. It goes into the next slot where it's been reviewed. Then the next slot, where it's been assigned, and then when it's completed, it's there for them to see. So at all times, it's visible for that employee to see,
And that's out on the floor?
Does anything happen? Yeah, it's actually where we have the pre-shift huddle.
Okay.
So every day, all of the employees are right in front of that board.
Okay.
And they're encouraged in that huddle. Hey, we don't have any suggestions. The board's empty. Let's get some suggestions. So we've had over 120 of those since June 23rd.
120
Yeah.
suggestions.
Do they get any incentives? Do you pay them, or do you give them anything for any of their suggestions?
And this is just here at this location.
I thought
too?
at some point they would pull one during the safety meetings.
We do. We give them recognition. There's a lot of mixed feelings about incentives for ideas and that kind of thing. I'll tell you my own experience is the biggest incentive for that is take action and communicate it. And if you recognize people, that you should do that too.
Yeah.
But that has more impact, and it always will, than a $25 gift certificate or whatever you can come up with.
That will always never be right.
The thing is, people always have something that irks them about their job. I mean, they're doing it and they're going, this broom is too short, or this chair doesn't feel comfortable. Or this my trash bin's on the left side. If it was on the right side, if I could just do that, it'd make it easier. I mean, those things always bother people. They don't need $25 or $100 or anything in return for that. if you'll just do it. They'll be back tomorrow with another suggestion.
So who?
Yeah.
So they can put that in whenever. Whose responsibility is it to look at the cards and act on them, or review them, or assess them?
So the supervision
The supervisor.
revises those cards or reviews those cards. It's typically a maintenance function. Most
Yeah.
things people find, especially if they're safety related.
Yeah.
Light bulbs
Those-
burned out, the fan's not working, there's a trip hazard in the floor. So most of those will get taken and converted to a
Right.
maintenance work order, and then it's easy to fix it. Some of them might be more of an improvement type of thing. Like I said, they've
Do you
figured out.
encourage them to look for things like that, or I'm just curious. How do you prompt them for the system? So this system's here for anything. We're looking to make your job safer. We're looking to
The
catch
system's
things
been
that
out there
break.
we've been doing that about 3 years. What we did when we first rolled it out was we were in our monthly meeting, we would pull a card and we would give a prize away. We did that for about 6 months to a year. We found we've actually got more involvement now than we were doing that.
Right.
And during the 100 days of summer, we call it, it's a program in the summertime that is a safety-driven program, because that's the time when people are out of school. There's more vehicles on the road. There's more kids playing in the road, and we were having more civilian fatalities in vehicle accidents with our trucks that are on the road during the 100 days of summer, as we call it. Plus, it's hotter. There's more fatigue and heat stress. So we decided if we could focus on our safety program in those 100 days, we'd really drive down our annual, fatality rates and accident rates, vehicle accidents. So that's been carried over into the MRF line of business, even though it kind of was created in the other line of business. So what we've done at this site is incorporate this Opportunity Knox card, we call it, in with that 100 days of summer. It's become actually one of the state measures. There's a competition between different lines of business and sites during the 100 days of summer, to have a good safety record and
Right.
to do certain things. So within the criteria for the recycling operations, we call post-collection, is the number of those cards you turn in, the amount of observations that you perform as far as out on the shop floor with your employees, and then, of course, your accident record. So
it's Opportunity Knox is in other locations too.
yeah, it was actually one that was that idea comes from I can't even think of that Japanese term now. It's a particular kind of board for identifying opportunities, having to do with manufacturing process. It's a visual. If I dig it up, I'll show you. I've got my
Okay. Well,
photographic notes. But what that site that I visited had determined was that board didn't work just right, and they were trying to incorporate near-miss opportunities,
Right.
identification of near misses in their safety program with their other continuous improvement, and both of them, you could meet both needs with this one approach. So, I came back. I was hired in like September of 2011. I went up there in October at this site. At the MRF manager that I told you was kind of a manufacturing guy. I took pictures. I ordered one of these boards, exactly duplicated, created the same thing here, and it was probably the first MRF, outside of that one.
so it's just one place that's for all employees.
For all employees.
Is it mostly focused on the sorters, or do anyone? Do you put stuff on it?
Anyone can put anything in
Anyone
it.
can. Typically, it's the
Who we're really trying to strive for are the people who normally don't have that influence. So like a plant lead, a supervisor, they don't need to fill out a card to get something done. It's in their control.
I see.
So this really to try to solicit more involvement, from people who otherwise wouldn't be involved in that process. And I'm telling you, when you have more than 100, we have had 120 of them, like I say, in less than 100 days. That's outstanding.
Yeah.
I mean, in a suggestion program, it's pretty phenomenal.
It
It
is.
surprises me, and it seems to have now kind of taken on its own momentum. And again, it's people respond to when you take action. I mean, that's the number one incentive. And we
So do
gave
you
away.
track it and look for if things start getting ripe or old? Do you? Is it
Yeah, and some of those, that's what we'll have to put on the card.
Yeah, it's going to take a while to.
Yeah, not everything you can write a work order to go fix this week. They might say there's and we had some turned in just in the last few days. There's some holes in the concrete. Well, that means I'm going to get a general contractor. He's going to have to come in here, bring a concrete truck and a crew, excavate the ground, and replace this section. It's going to take him 2 or 3 days, and he'll have to do it at a time when the MRF isn't using, that operating really. So, those things get planned out a month to down the road like that.
Tools and techniques used. Quality types of tools and techniques. And maybe start arbitrarily with the people on the farm. So it's good to get a feel for who uses them and where. So starting with the sorters, do they have any, are they taught any sort of tools and techniques that you can think of that would, like what?
It's going to be easier when we walk out there and you can kind of see it in front of you.
Okay. So so they're incorporated into their jobs of how they do what they do. But do you, for instance, have you taught them basic problem solving, or 5 whys or fish bones or anything, basic stuff like that? Or
we have had some teams here in the past where we've done that. We've taken them through that. So like all of the plant lead level and like a circle of sorters around them.
Okay.
Have been involved with those type of continuous improvement tools or exercises. There's a licensed like web-based library of video around continuous improvement called Gemba Academy. It's also like owned by the Kaizen Institute as a group, and I had a license to that all of last year, and had like all of the folks that were in the lead positions and supervision go through all those modules.
Okay.
So that's another piece of it. I'm trying to decide whether I want to renew that this year or not, because I think almost every one of those videos I found floating around on YouTube now. So
yeah.
But it was
well, but how about the efficacy? Do you find it useful? Did you find any difference? Did you find it change behaviors? What happened?
Yeah, it helped enlighten people to a different kind of thinking. One of the things you overcome is a shift of this. I don't want to dig you down into a rabbit hole if you don't need to be there. But one of the things that I found was a personal awakening of myself years ago was I was very good at during my shift. As a shift supervisor, I was very good at keeping things running through the end of my shift, whatever it took.
Right.
I mean, that was pretty much could be your slogan, whatever it takes. And so by hook or by crook, I had all the machines that still had them all running. If I had 30 machines, I still had 30 of them running at the end of the shift. Doesn't mean I made the right choice or did the right thing. I may have made short-term decisions because I was really measured on, at the end of my shift, the next guy's going to come in and go, I had 10 machines down when I got here, that kind of thing. So you're always pushed to try to keep
just because you took the last 2 hours getting all your machines to finally work to hand off.
To hand off or whatever. Or maybe the machine's not running optimally. Maybe you should have pulled the mold out or the die, sent it to the tool shop, and just said that's just how it is. It needs to be fixed. If it's broke, fix it.
Yeah.
So it wasn't until a certain point in my career where I realized I wasn't the best supervisor for doing that. The right way to do it is what's right in the long term, and taking a little longer view of things takes courage, but it also takes confidence in that your managers or supervisors above you are going to support you for doing the right thing. So that was a shift that occurred at a certain point in my career, and I see that very much, in this business, is that people have that whatever it takes attitude, thinking they're doing the right thing. It's not that they're trying to do something wrong, but they think that's the measure of how good they are is whatever it takes to keep something running. So rather than make a decision and say I'm going to shut this down and send 30 people home today while we fix this and make this thing run better, So tomorrow when we come in, you know, it'll be more productive, it's gonna work better. You know, they'll just try to limp along through the end of the shift so they can say we ran for 8 hours or whatever the, you know.
So they get reviewed based on not just productivity, but long-term
Yeah,
productivity.
it's really changing that communication so that they understand the expectations. So something like Gimba Academy or any of those resources that give you more of a kind of a Deming, you know, philosophy around running the process or managing the process, it helps them understand a different perspective. That it really kind of upsets the apple cart when you start talking in those. And in fact, there are managers. You know, I had a general manager here that worked for me. He didn't clash with me, but I know he left because fundamentally
He was on a different page.
he just wasn't wired that way.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And he's thinking, you're just going to run this place out of business, you know, if we do it that way. You know, that's not how you do it. And so, you know, he kind of kept it quiet and he did what he was asked to do. But I know he wasn't ever 100%, you know, yeah, I get it. This makes sense.
Yeah. He wasn't
You
on
know.
the same page.
Yeah.
So there's the basic tools used and techniques, and you've mentioned that's at the different level. What about more advanced, you know, as you get into like sampling and analysis, how are you dealing with those types of more analytic tools? So that gets more into the tools type course of who knows them, who needs to know them, what do you do with them, you know, all that stuff.
That gets into, let me just do a time check.
Yep.
That gets into a real area that I'd like to develop out and build training around, and that's I have people that are capable, you know, at operational level out there of being able to capture data and, you know, being taught tools for like SPC, understanding a trend, you know, and when to make a change to a process, when to take action.
Well, when does this sort of analysis depth really started grabbing hold here? Has it been here for a long time? I mean, you've been here since you said 2011, but I'm guessing that wasn't like immediately put in place.
Right.
Or if it had, you know, it started off probably you were it, and then it's sort of, so it didn't sound like the demands for this heavier analytic ability.
No, that's true.
It's now sort of snowballing a bit.
So we now are capturing data that people can react to, and we need to reinforce, you know, their understanding of what they're seeing.
Okay, so you're finding that there are needs for more analysis capabilities, and then we talked about the most interesting decisions. So there may be others as you come up. One was the concept of sampling. Current challenges, contamination, which is interesting on a number of, you know, you talked about the quality, variability, and definitions of quality. Under this, why did the decision, if we say, what is the decision? I'm not sure. There could be different decisions. In other words, the decision at Waste Management to get into MRF business was actually done as a response to the change in the push from the municipalities. But since you were so much bigger than the other folks, and because the potential to the impact of collection and all this stuff, it seems it made sense then to try and stay in the forefront of it. But that's one decision that came up early on, and then preceding, at least locally, preceding you coming in September 2011, there was the recognition that maybe there's an opportunity for applying different skill set as for a MRF manager, and so that would be an interesting, you know, why did the decision arise? Because there's an opportunity and an acknowledgement that maybe the same skills or a new skill set may be useful in the new demands of this. And so that's where it'd be interesting to bring in the original quote, the original job description you were posting to see how that in you know, concrete data, what did that actually look like, or what were the elements, even if there was a little bit of it, what did it look like? Or even if you don't have that, the situation, you know, it was actively asked for is we're asking for this type of person, a person with waste experience, or specifically manufacturing, or regulated, or automotive, or something that would paint a picture that would bring a person like yourself in, even if the job description didn't really have those words in it. That would be interesting to know how it was parlayed, because it's more than a piece of paper. Since it came from a recruiter, the recruiter was to be the interpreter of that and looking for. So I don't even know how that process went. They hunted for you, or you responded to did you respond to something?
No,
or
I
just
got a phone call with my.
Okay, so he was a headhunter.
He's a headhunter that was a full-time waste management recruiter.
Okay. Okay, so he headhunted you, but you weren't in the waste business. He reached out to a specific business, knowing where he was going.
Yeah, he used recruiting skills to ferret out, a person.
Okay, so that
who gave up
situation
my
is
name
pretty
probably
telling.
and found
Right.
it, so.
And since then, since you've come in, have there been any other, let's say, major decision points relative to how you're approaching business, or how waste management is approaching business? I didn't think so. I mean, it sounds like now you're developing, you're working the plan, but it's based on continuous improvement and analytics
Well, I'm
and
not
quality.
sure. Yes, this is the most dynamic business I've ever been in. So the question is, like, I can write a book about 4 years that I've been here and all the
Right.
decisions and all the changes and all that stuff. Not that I've made, but
Well,
myself and the
but
company.
you being here and what's going on now is still seemingly consistent with the original job posting you responded to. In other words, you didn't take a job. Well, let me ask it this way instead of telling. Are you doing the job you think you responded to, or did you make this job based on them letting you in the door, or where is it in between?
I'm doing the job that I think I've created,
Right, I
but it's
get that.
consistent with the direction that the company's going. I think there are managers who were probably hired at the same time I was that felt like they've been, running.
Right, but you were
But in
recruited
your
in from outside.
interpretation, it's what the company wants, or it's a specific, like, we need this.
I've been like pushing.
Yeah.
So
But was that
what's
asked
changed
for?
in the company are things that it seems like I was pushing before it rolled out. And to say
So basically, they didn't have. It wasn't like, oh,
It
we
wasn't-
want you to come in because we want quality.
We want you to do
we want
this.
continuous
They
improvement.
just want you to
They
do
hired
better
him, and
in
he
this
just
merge.
decided to
it
do
really, I think it
Fix
was
the
more, like you
problem.
said, it was kind of a dumb luck thing. Hey, that guy out there is doing some really good stuff and it seems to be working. We don't even understand what he's doing or what that
You
stuff
got some
is.
of
But then they
Exactly.
tried to
Skills.
clone that person and find someone like him, so they
Yeah.
were asking for someone
they
to
knew that
drive.
much.
Yeah.
They
But
couldn't
I
have-
don't think they
But there was
understood.
no specific
yeah.
directive, like, he's doing this, so you start
Yes,
doing
Yeah,
it.
they
it's kind
couldn't-
of like
they
they
could
were
not
like,
have articulated
go, good luck.
all
You
of
will
the things
probably-
he
you
was
will do
doing.
good.
See, but
Yeah,
that's really
exactly.
interesting.
It wasn't
as to
like they
what was
were-
articulated, and that nebulous part is to.
I don't think you're going to get a better answer, even if you interviewed him at that time. That's about all you would have gotten out of anybody. I think they would have said, find somebody like him. I literally had a recruiter call me like a year and a half ago, and they said, John, do you know anybody like you? I said, well, no, I don't know what you mean. They said, well, somebody that does what you do there. I mean,
Right.
with all the things that you're doing, do you know somebody like that? And I said, well, I know people in the industry. They're everywhere, But I mean, that was about the extent of,
Right.
what
Well,
they were looking for.
I think that's real interesting and telling as to they had some level, a vague concept of someone doing things differently, and some of the attributes that based on maybe a manufacturing or regulated or some sort of a background that
Well,
emulated.
I know that they were looking for a person. This is from the recruiter when I was first talked to them. They were looking for someone that had a process background,
Okay.
that had been from a manufacturing, background,
Right.
that had been a manager at a certain level of responsibility in the organization.
See, that's huge right there. I mean, just saying that, knowing that you'd have a high degree of autonomy being a MRF manager, saying if you're able to embody that and keep doing that type of stuff, that's kind of what we think we saw over there. Isn't that? So you're still in line.
But then everything else you took, because they never said, now
They didn't say
contact
how.
this
They
person
didn't say how. They
and,
just
do,
had a.
and duplicate that
Right.
exactly.
No,
Now
no.
they just said,
Did you even go to
So
that
you-
other place?
Yeah, actually,
You
that was
created
that's what I said
everything else,
a while
or?
ago. There's a guy named Mike Lunau who's now in Texas. Mike was the MRF manager up in Minneapolis. So it was 1 month after I was hired that I went up to Minneapolis. It was about 10 degrees already.
God.
Oh, God.
It's in November, I think it was. It felt like it. I think it was 20-some degrees or something. But so I went through the MRF and went and looked at systems that were very much, what you would see in a manufacturing place that has, continuous improvement that's evolved
Right.
for some time. He had been there about 5 years, so he had some systems in place that other MRFs, wouldn't have been able to develop even
Right.
within a year, because again, you first have to put people in place and create the culture. So some of that's what I say, the opportunity in Oxford, I ripped that off, brought it back here, a month later I was doing the same
Right.
thing. So some of those things, we're able to take and use. Some of it we've completely created on our own. At the time I was doing the composition auditing, I was doing that here. I had a visitor, they said, so-and-so is doing that out west. And I got that person's name and I called it and they said, well, we're creating an access database to do this kind of auditing to keep data in. And so I was able to get in the initial group of about 4 MRFs that were collecting that data.
Right.
I was able to change the software, based on...
So you found out of it just by luck?
Yeah.
Because there's no clearinghouse for this type of stuff.
Right.
Now or still. I mean,
There's no
now
one
even
or
corporate.
back then.
Right. It's kind
And
of
there
just
still
like
isn't, right? That's
destiny.
That's
It
another
just
thing.
kinda
Is there's no
lined up.
clearinghouse
If you don't
within.
hear from it,
Yeah,
you don't know.
exactly.
So, but I was able to get input into it to create like a trend chart,
Yeah.
to where we can track standard deviation, calculate that, and create a trend chart for different sets of data.
Yeah.
That as part of that functionality, I can pull out reports that we couldn't do before.
Right.
So,
So you actually did kind of get calibrated based on what they saw as being your not mentor, because that wasn't the case at all, but
No.
your genesis. So you actually went to that person, and
So-
whether or not they they didn't ask you to go be that person, but they gave the opportunity.
Had I never gone there, the result would have been very similar, because everything he was doing was things I would have been doing anyway.
But at least you
What
saw
he
it in
did
to
is-
action.
see
More than
something
anything,
in
it
place
gave me
already.
some tangible
Yeah.
evidence that it can work.
Right. It gave
in
you
this
confidence because you had been in the
Yeah,
Merck
and that
business.
it's encouraged.
Right.
That people want more
Do you
of
still
this
keep
stuff,
up with
you
him?
know. Yeah, I received an email about 2 weeks from him. He was actually sharing some visual
How about that?
stuff from him. He was promoted to an area director.
Right.
He's over Texas and Oklahoma, so he's got multiple sites under him. And he sent me something he's doing out there that looked pretty cool. So that was something she did. She took it and integrated it into a visual that tells you to check, do, and verify certain steps on a piece of equipment,
Mhm.
and then a visual of the status of it.
Right.
And then we're tying that to our inspection process. So yeah,
Okay.
yeah, and we'll do things. I'll send him a book or something I've read on, that kind of
There you
thing.
go. Okay.
Where's he
Excellent.
based?
Okay.
Where's he actually based?
He's in Houston.
Isn't that where the conference is? In
What?
The conference in
Oh, in Houston,
November?
yeah.
If you're gonna go, you should meet up with him.
Yeah, I'll be there in mid-November.
If you'd be willing.
There's a Quality and Education Conference in Houston, ASQ conference.
What's the date?
It's mid-November.
Yeah.
I'm like, are you leaving again?
Okay.
Ah, he
Well,
keeps leaving,
Tony,
and I'm
Well,
like
no,
here.
what I won't go, but what I was going to suggest was give me the exact details, and I can get you a tour of another MRF that's a single stream MRF like ours.
Yeah.
But you'll see his, and Mike's, like I say, Mike's on a roll, because he kind of had it modeled up there. He became the director for
Yeah.
Canada in the Northwest, and then now he's over this Texas, Oklahoma, and he's got a resource that he's smart to fill. He's added an ops improvement guy for his region that reports to him, and that guy's the connecting point that floats between the different
All of the
plants to
other
roll
ones,
out
yes.
the standardization in Mike's area. But there again, that's an example of even if you promoted me to a director, I'm going to have the influence within my market
Yeah.
area.
That's right.
But so Mike's a person who's developed resources within his market area. He's really smart at attracting talent. I know people that are working for him. He really scarfed up some good guys that were like floating around at one point that were going to all these MRFs doing nothing but ops improvement. He's got all these guys working for him. He's a person that, the other directors, and I've got a great boss. He's one of the best people I've ever worked for. But his background's not operations, his background's finance. And all this world's new to him. So it's not this isn't his thing. He understands that it's great and he wants people doing it, but it's just not
Just
good
can't
job
relate
you
to.
over there doing
exactly.
it, 'cause
Yeah.
I don't know what you're doing.
Yeah, and I'll
Yeah,
support you,
great, yeah.
and he'll advocate it.
It's helping the money.
But
Keep it
it's
up.
not him, you know, he
doesn't
hasn't
understand
lived
it.
it, so that's all he can do. But this guy out there has actually worked his way up through the shop floor of a manufacturing plant
Right.
and lived and breathes this stuff, and he's very good at rolling it out and creating that culture. So, you know, it needs to be emulated across the country. I mean, there's a case study being made, you know, based on, I think, his area of influence, what he's done on a wider scale. And it's really the path that I would take if I keep, you know, moving within this country.
Okay. Let's see. What was it? How did you make the decision?
Are the decisions that in these questions, are you trying to target what your case study would be about?
Yeah.
Because I feel like there are many decisions.
There are many decisions.
So you kind of are going to want to sit and think about which decisions you want to target for the class.
Right, and that's the point.
Well,
Is
we have to
if the
have
first
a couple
decision about
different
getting
ones,
into the
'cause there'll be
or trying to
several
be in the market
questions.
is like interesting, but not really the case. It's like you made that decision, and that's why you're on the board. Now you got to step up and figure out what you're going to do with it. Then the next decision was, I mean, locally it sounds like it's getting into. Well, actually, after that, the stepping up part started with the WMRA engineering. Figured out what are we going to do with this stuff, and that continued on, but. The decision, I guess, locally was to basically bring in a person like yourself to run a MRF. That's a huge decision that was made. Now, is that the decision that's of interest here, or is that another basis for other decisions that have to continue to be made? I'm not quite sure yet. We'll have to talk about
We'll have
that
to-
to see, because it's not like it's not like writing a novel. You get up to a final, you know, scene where you got to make the decision. What am I going to do now?
Yeah.
You know, what should Waste Management do at Pembroke Pines now? I'm not sure that's the right consideration that they should be looking at. Maybe, because there's tons of uncertainties and it's wide open. Where would you go next? Maybe we couch it more. The decision today is, you know, I've got customers that are highly variable in a commodity market, which is highly variable in the world. Then I've got municipalities that are not the same. I've got processes locally and across other regional sites that are different and similar, and all these things on my plate. What should I do? What should be my focus, perhaps? And that's something that sounds like you have to deal with all the time. Is what's my focus? Do I look in, you know? And part of it, I think I've heard what your focus is probably more from a process, because you think that's going to be the enabler. It's without the.
No, there's a bigger picture, and the battles have to be fought on many fronts. You know, one of the things we're doing on the municipal side is we're not bidding on contracts. We're just not bidding on a contract if it's not something that's in our best business interest. That sounds like a no-brainer, but that's a change in our business strategy.
Because you didn't know before that.
Yeah, before we always went after
Take any
business.
bid.
Well, is it because you didn't know any better, or is it because that was just a culture, or both? Because now you may have more analytics to know, hey, I know I can't make money if they start giving me this type of crap.
I mean, it was both. As an organization, we're much more cohesive, and the lines of business are communicating more between each other. I mean, people are going out and writing contracts, making a deal that the MRF didn't even know about.
Right.
They just got, we're told, hey, now you've got the city of this or the city of that, and the contract terms and conditions just kind of, or whatever they were. So that's changed now, you know, with some realignment of responsibilities. So, you know, an example is like City of Hialeah put out a bid last year, put out an RFP, and nobody bid on it. Can you imagine that? The City of St. Pete put out a bid for recycling. Nobody bid on it. That's happened in the last 2 years.
Because the terms that they were
The terms were unacceptable for anyone
to bid
to
on.
pursue.
Yeah.
So you couldn't, okay, it's more, all right. So you don't have, it doesn't sound like you have sort of a parametric bid where you say, you know, we're going to pay X per, you know, based on your.
Yeah, they don't ask for quotes. They hire
Yeah, see,
engineering.
that's just,
they
that's
hire,
just, right.
They hire engineering firms.
You're going
to
to take it
come
or leave it.
and give them good or bad advice, whatever, and they write up this, you know, document that's 100 pages or whatever.
Right.
And then they send that out, you know, to, you know, they put a notice of public bids then your different companies will say, I'd like to see that RFP, I'd like, consider it. If they like the terms, they'll bid on it. If they don't like it, they write a formal letter saying, we just don't see that this is in
So
our
there
best interest at
are
this time.
no items in there that you could work with and make it reasonable.
No. In fact, one of the things that, was most disturbing, they wanted rebates, regardless of whether or not
There's anything
material's
in it.
worth anything. And they also said that their waste study that they hired someone to do indicated that their material was 30% contamination, plus, like another 20% glass, and that there was no threshold if it continued to increase in contamination. So if it was 99% trash, you would still have to rebate them some number. You still have to pick it up, collect it, take it away. So, we can look at that and say, well, that doesn't make sense. So, but that's actually a change in strategy not to bid on those kind of contracts. So the industry's woken up. I pulled this out earlier. I wasn't trying to read while you were talking. I was going to show this was a conference I attended in Chicago. So they had dual tracks on these 2 days to discuss topics relevant. So it was it wasn't just like a trade show with physical booths.
Right.
It was speakers giving presentations. So this topic was managing contamination. So there's a panel talking about managing contamination. This one was called problematic materials.
Real
This
quick,
one
I
was
need to
about-
interrupt.
Yeah.
But I have to leave.
Okay, bye.
So.
I have to leave too.
Nice seeing you again.
You bet. Good to see you. I'm
Take
so
care.
glad. Yeah.
Good luck, girls.
Good luck.
If
See
you
you
guys
back
need anything, let
in
me
the
know.
morning. We'll see you
Tomorrow I can't. Friday.
Friday. Yeah.
Is that
Okay.
okay?
Have a great weekend.
I'll be here Friday. Coming in.
Oh.
Tomorrow's Thursday.
Yeah. Thanks. Have a great Thursday.
Right.
Recycling, the kind of state of practice, and it was kind of talking about these same kind of conditions. Glass recycling, it's actually a big challenge in our
As you said,
industry.
you don't make really money off
Yeah,
of
you
it.
can spend a whole day talking about challenges there. And then over on this side, more about curbside residential recycling, those kind of challenges. we're facing.
That might be interesting as a litmus of what's currently important to the field. I know if we took a
Yep.
shot of this,
That's true. This is public.
Scan.
This was public and private contracts. But if you listen to what the guy was talking about, he was really talking about, don't do stupid contracts.
so under current
You know?
challenges, this sort of represents what, is this a waste management only or
No,
just recycling?
this is the industry. This is NWRA sponsored this National Waste and Recycling Association
Oh, that sounds like an awesome fun.
in Chicago. There's actually a panel this year, this October. It'll be in Amelia Island, I think.
That's nice.
And I think there's a professor from University of Florida, a solid waste professor, is the moderator, and then he's invited people from the waste industry. My boss will be there speaking, and he'll be asking me to prepare materials for his presentation. So that's a good one if you can make it. But anyway, you can see that's like you said, it's kind of a snapshot to show it's not just a Reuter problem here at this plant. It's not a waste management issue. It's an industry-wide problem that's
Okay.
come to the surface.
Yeah. Okay, let's see, get through this.
Well, let me ask.
Yeah, we gotta get
Well, the
timing.
thing is, I've got this guy that I've been, cool in his heels for 2 hours, who flew here from Houston to spend the day with me. It was a conflict. At the last minute, they changed the times around, and I didn't want to put you guys off. So, can I give you guys a walkthrough?
Yeah.
And then let's pick up this conversation. Either I can come to Nova, or we'll do a conference call.
Yeah,
on
why
the
don't we do
phone.
that? Because,
Yeah.
it's important, the most important thing is they need to see the place. That's one thing,
Yeah.
we can have this discussion anywhere.
Yeah.
But let's do that, because that's the most important thing, is to,
Okay. If we could do a
We have a
30-minute
lot, too.
walkthrough. that sound
whatever
good?
works for you,
All right.
Let's do that.
So you're going to see on the wall by the door you came in, there's going to be some orange hard hats and vests. So you want to dress like me with a vest and safety glasses.
Do we leave our stuff here, or do we?
Stuff was.
You keep
Go
jumping
ahead.
from a 30,000 foot level to a 2 foot level. Especially, right?
Vision versus realization, lessons learned. So, overall, on the high level, when you came in back in 2011,
We have that.
you
vision.
had a vision, you developed a vision, and how's it been within this
So
time
this
frame?
is during my operation, not waste management, but
No, from your view.
from others.
Yeah, at your place.
Yeah. Well, I mean, the vision was to really reorganize, staffing, according to getting our leadership in the right place, and then put in specific measures or metrics, for process laborers. We've been doing that. We continue to do
You did that initially. I mean, you did that early on, and then you've been.
Yeah, I mean, it still took a while to get to that
Okay.
point. So we're really only about 2 years into that processing. I've only been here 4 years, so we're really about a 2-year log.
Right.
And then, as far as the reality, I think I kind of came into this assuming there would be certain constants,
There you go. Yeah.
and the constant being that the material supply would stay somewhat the same, at least in the near future. And it's been shifting dramatically, just in the time, even in the 2 years we've been monitoring it. So, certain assumptions that were made about the design of this MRF, the design of this system out here. We wouldn't design the MRF the way it is now. And I don't mean like some of the design issues that had to do with hodgepodge of material equipment brought in, but I mean, it's designed for a capacity that's different than what
Right,
we're
a
running
mix.
now. Yeah, a different
right.
mix of material. It was assuming about 60 to 70% newspaper, and now we're at about 20 to 25% newspaper.
People don't read newspapers.
So you wouldn't have all these extra screens, you wouldn't have all these extra conveyors, you would focus more of your capital investment on the container side, reclaiming it, and on the efficiency of separating things better.
And you either have to retool to grab that space back, or is that the only option because it was laid out
Yeah,
expecting
you do
that?
have to.
You'll just take it as
physically remove equipment.
Yeah.
You'd replace some of the inefficient equipment that's been identified with newer design equipment.
but of the others type.
But where I've stopped, and I actually had a program this year. I started last fall. I sent out a request for qualifications to 7 companies, and I narrowed it down to 3. And I was going into the next phase to spend about $10 to $15 million in the place, rip everything out, clean it up, light it up, paint
Right.
it, brighten this place up, and get in a new system installed in it. And I stopped it this spring because I got to that point where I was seeing that contamination level, which even last year was around 15%, growing at like 25%. What I don't know is where it's going to be next year. So I'm making an assumption that if it follows that trajectory, that whatever I buy this year and install next year would be obsolete by the time I put it in place. So I need to understand, what's happening with this waste stream. And there wasn't technology being offered to me by the manufacturers to where I could automate that removal. So all those people in the front, they don't have robots yet, designed to take all that stuff out, or other types of equipment.
Right.
I am learning about combinations of equipment you can string together
Right.
that might be able to do some of that. But it's one of those things that it's a $10 million gamble, maybe
Right.
you can put that in, or $5 million, and it might not really work that well. So we don't know yet. But there are other possibilities. So we're kind of working on different fronts, and what I've been trying to do this year is get that message, to DEP to say, we've got to have help.
You
We've got to change immediately.
get it out of the stream.
Yeah, what's
Not
going
just-
on, at the municipalities. And I was very encouraged at a national waste conference to hear these city leaders like Philadelphia and, places like that, Chicago, had, their sustainability directors talking about contamination in their waste streams and what they're doing to clean it up. And they're using data from audits, that are being performed, usually by third parties, for that kind of stuff. So that's all real encouraging. I think it can move behavior a lot faster than we give it credit.
Yeah.
And meanwhile, things that our posturing, when we don't bid on a contract, and none of our
Sends a
competitors
message,
do
yeah.
either, tells the city, wow, we thought these guys were
We're out of
bluffing,
luck
but,
now.
yeah, this is real. They really do. They really can't make money.
Resources and constraints. What do you think your main resources are?
People. And my main constraints are people. I mean, that's really true. Internally, just like say within the MRF, there's certain constraints. It's difficult to recruit people in at, like when I say recruit, hire people in at really a low level, like as a sorter. That is not a pretty job. It seems like punishment, So I've had people come in, oh, you want to bring your children in here and make them see this, so they'll stay in school. But it is a tough environment. Even in a really, there are MRFs that are newer, cleaner, and designed a little better. But even so, it's a tough job. I mean,
Yeah.
we've done anything where we had to stand in one place and bend over, for any length of time. It's tough. So what they do is hard.
It's not the same thing coming through. Like
No.
some
In fact,
manufacturing things, you have the same thing
yeah,
that
that's
be
right.
coming
That's a good
through.
point. Yeah, it's a hunt and search kind of
Yeah.
thing in your mind. Yeah, it must be mentally fatiguing. So when you consider that, that's a tough position to fill. Although we're in an area, demographically, where I have a captive population, and they don't have that in other areas. I mean, I have workers that don't have a lot of options. If you can't read, your options are limited. If you've never had a job and you're an adult and you came to America and you really don't have anything to show, it's tough, So I've got people who've worked out there 5, 6, 7, 10 years or longer as sorters, and I don't have a lot of attrition. So that's a resource. I've got the guy here, the training guy, who says, "Oh, I assume you have a lot of churning and turnover." I said, "No." He's like, "What? No, everybody I talk to says they can't keep people, and as soon as they train them, they're gone." I said, "I just don't have that problem." And I really do think a lot of it's my demographic. So there is a kind of a community feeling, with the group. There's a lot of people that know each other, that live nearby, they're friends or family. So they tend to come to work, and they're okay with it,
Right.
It's a good job. I mean, they as far as a solid job with benefits and all that kind of stuff. We're still a company that does kind of old school benefits and all that for employees, and it's safe. It looks dangerous, but we've had 0 accidents this year. So
It's amazing.
It's not like people being carried out in body bags, left and right. It's
Are you recycling?
Huh?
You're recycling.
They go to China in a pail. So it's a good environment. The constraints are, I'm working with a population of people that have 0 to no education,
understand
0
these
to no
concepts.
English. They have, and I'm not saying this other than I've researched it, and I've talked to people, I've talked to my employees. There is a basic mistrust for authority. I'm told that by my HR person, and it's not here. It's in their own country, and it's because in Haiti,
It's a
employees
cultural,
are
yeah.
so exploited, by people in power positions. They're so exploited in every situation. I've got a book here. It's real translations, right, for phrases for people visiting Haiti. And one section is for like aid workers, and one of the phrases translates, "You don't have to give me sex to get free food." So I mean that's what they're accustomed to in a culture of desperation, where people have lived through earthquakes and famines and all this kind of stuff, diseases. So when you bring people in here and say, "Hey, I'm a good boss. I'm not a bad boss. I'm a good boss. You can trust me," it's real hard to get over that chasm. It's really, really tough. And even if I was from their own culture, from Haiti,
That might
it
even be
doesn't
worse.
fix it.
It'd be worse.
Maybe so. So, when you talk about the continuous improvement culture, the number one thing, it should be the first chapter. The title of the chapter should be trust. That's the very first thing that precedes any kind of continuous improvement. Is people have to be able to follow some of Deming's principles are just that: non-blaming, non-judgmental. You got to take down barriers so people can come and talk about a problem without fear, without hiding it and being afraid of retribution, or I'm going to get myself or somebody else in trouble. They have to be able to talk about a real problem, even when they make their own mistakes, because I know I have to design a process where people can make mistakes, but it doesn't affect the customer or safety or machine. You have to be able to design processes that way. Don't ever design a process assuming I'm going to go hire people that don't make mistakes, or you're a fool. So given that, you have to have the people that are working for you that can trust that they can talk openly and engage that way. So there's a lot of communication that has to occur all the time. I think our huddles, the engagement we do, I think what our plant leads do as a role here is real vital. Having quality people in that role that aren't abusive themselves. We had supervisors and we've had leaders out there that were flat abusive to the employees. You know, that certainly didn't help. So I had to overcome kind of a period there too. You kind of let that wash out. So that's my biggest constraint, and that's my biggest resource.
No, I get that. Do you have like, sort of got one big continuous process, like process flows, you have documentation for your processes and things like that, or work instructions?
Some we've created, work instructions, some we've created process flow.
For training, but it's a little different. It's, you know, as a continuous process like that, you know, how do you, are they what, organized or more around the job functions?
They're all task related, maybe?
Where we have work instructions?
Well, work instructions would be task related,
Yeah.
you know, you're a sorter doing this or that, or
Yeah.
moving stuff around. Let's see, this one says sampling how and why the process and analysis. So this is getting into the, like the MSA type of thing, and we get, I don't think we need to really go over that right now because we've been through some of that, how and why is being done, you know, why was it initially being done? I think you've sort of told us just to get a handle on the incoming stream variability and,
No.
well, not variability, excuse me, the level.
Initially it was done on the outbound stream.
Oh, just on the residuals?
Just on, well, not on the residuals, it was done on products I was making that were going out. So like the paper, for instance, I wanted to see, you know, what the quality of the paper is with different plastics. So I knew that how well the process was working and separating.
So you what, tear down a bale and do a postmortem of a bale type thing, or what?
Yeah.
Okay.
Now, I kind of adapted, and did a modified version of that, assuming that the bale is homogeneous, and I think I could make that assumption. I didn't
Right,
find
there's no
it.
reason not to.
Yeah. I could take a bucket where that paper falls down into that. I said,
Yeah,
the
just
waterfall.
Basically, yeah.
Take a
So I
little,
take a
take a
200-pound
dipper out
sample
of
that
it.
way, and then the commodities that are in the silos, when they spill out, we would shovel off 200 pounds of that.
Okay.
And so we would take, you know, basically.
Okay. So it started there actually. So you looked on the.
So it was on the outbound to measure my process, and it wasn't, and I was doing that about a year before we started doing the inbound.
Okay.
And then because it was kind of like, I've got to get control
Yeah,
of
you got
what's inside the walls
what's going on
first.
right now.
Once I did that, I started doing the inbound. Actually, I did my first inbound to do a mass balance to be able to say,
Right.
here's what I'm producing, here's what I sell every month. How does that match what's coming in? And it was actually startling, and I'd like to do more studies around that. But I found things like 20% of my inbound material is cardboard, but only 10% of my outbound material is cardboard. So where did it go?
Yeah, what's happening in between
Just
process?
beat up and shredded into you know, I don't know.
Well, when I looked at it not just from a percentage, but looked for tons, I noticed that like 7,000 tons of my cardboard disappeared, but I got an increase in O&P of 7,000 tons. You know, so it was almost like it was really.
So it turns
easy to
into
put
mixed
together.
paper when it doesn't look like cardboard anymore.
Yeah, so it ends up in the paper bale. So it wasn't a complete loss. Instead of selling it for $120, you know, a ton, maybe I sold it for $100 a ton, something relative to it. But there is a loss there, and if you could do a better job, you could improve it. But you can also learn some things about like your screen designs from that. Like when I was looking to spec new screens, that was information I was telling the equipment suppliers to say, you know, we're in the age of Amazon and UPS and all that stuff. So, you know, I get a lot of boxes at my house that are this big. I buy a lot of stuff on eBay, and I buy a lot of books.
I got Amazon Prime.
Yeah, Amazon Prime is
Oh my
everything.
God, we got so much at our house now.
Yeah, I need a box of cereal. I'll go ahead and order it now. I'll wait till Saturday.
They do Sunday deliveries now.
Wow.
All right, automatic reorders on Amazon Prime.
Postal service. It's
Incredible.
working on Sundays.
So,
Really?
but what that means is there's a lot of boxes that when they
That are
break them down,
small.
they're the size of a piece of
Yeah.
paper or a little bigger. But what they do is they go over those, they go through the OCC screen, but they go over the OP screen. So then I am faced with, is it worth it to put a person in there just to take out the
little
cardboard?
boxes.
Yeah.
Or, you know, to get that extra 20% difference?
You need the plastic bag thing.
Yeah, plastic bag. The thing about the plastic bag thing is,
There's so many different locations.
the plastic bags are a problem, okay, to recycle them. For one thing, there's no money in it.
But it goes in a lot of other stuff. It ends up
It
in the
does.
finished product.
It's a contaminant. So one is it wraps around my screens. So they do make screen designs that are a little less wrapping course, if it doesn't wrap around my screens, it's going to end up in my contaminating something downstream, and that means that we're shipping it to China as paper. Mostly is kind of my strategy.
So what's the chance of those types of bags getting designed out? Just like, going from incandescents to
is it in
CFLs
the
to
marketplace or in the packaging industry?
packaging industry.
Yeah, that's a possible solution.
A few months
I
ago,
mean, there's
though,
that for a variety of reasons. First of all, we can come up with a better bag.
You shop at Whole Foods?
the
Yeah.
paper
You carry
bags.
your bag?
No.
Huh?
Hmm?
Why don't you?
Actually, I think it's because there's a lot of stuff about, the bags are
Dirty.
they get dirty. They get crap in them. It's like, what are you going to wash the bags now? And,
I read that
Yes.
too. Seems silly to me.
I
Come
know.
here. What do you got?
Bolígrafo, 140.
Yeah?
It's down. Hi. I call hydraulic supply,
All right.
so I'll go down.
Thank you. Oops, the words.
anyway,
So yeah, that's a different battle.
oh, hydraulic lines.
I know in California a while back, they were like not
Yeah,
that
there
long
are
ago, a
cities
few
that
months
have
ago,
back
they were,
bans.
or they were going to charge
You
the
know
bags,
what-
they were
you
doing
know
all
what
that
Florida
stuff, and there was
did,
a whole
right?
debate. Yeah.
You know what Florida did?
No.
This was about 3 years ago. They passed a law.
Oh, no paper bags, right?
No, about plastic. They
Oh.
passed a law saying that nobody could ban plastic bags.
Well, because there's other industry, there's everything's
a
tied
proactive-
together, right?
They
So,
proactively,
Walmart,
they proactively passed a law saying,
Or
so what they said was it's illegal to introduce legislation to ban plastic bags. So you can't even introduce legislation.
But you can charge for bags if
Yeah.
you're a supermarket. But
Oh.
why would you want to go there
Or does
when
it?
I can get them for free
Yeah.
at Publix?
Or somebody else will go to the next supermarket.
yeah, just
Anyway,
start getting people to
we'll
reuse
jump
it.
on
That's it.
Reusable
I think
bags,
that basically,
That's
we
it.
talked about safety and quality,
Yeah.
going from the bottom up, quality expectation, customs, we've already talked about that stuff. Impact municipalities, and ultimate, we talked about that, market for resale of commodities, historical and variability, we talked about that, analysis of residual. We didn't talk much about that, but we had talked about that earlier. So it first went from analysis of your final product to incoming and then finally residual, right? It's the last thing you've been looking at is if I'm putting any good things in my
Yeah.
residual.
And that's really effective on the outbound stream. You guys saw all the silos. What I didn't tell you is after that container line, anything that's left over, we call that residual. So it didn't get sorted. And I do actually have some people on that line taking one last pick at it, say, oh, there's an aluminum can, or, so they're pulling stuff off. And they actually get quite a bit out. But what goes into that final end it goes into a compactor. That's our MRF waste. I mean, that's the residue, the stuff that the design of the system didn't sort out, and it might be stuff that's not something recyclable anyway, shouldn't have been there, but it's mostly little stuff. So that stuff I can do audits of, and it tells me everything about my process. Because once I've established a baseline, right now it's 90% seems to be the residue level that's a normal state when everything's working well.
That's actually, residue, 90% is actually residue. So
Yeah.
10% is not residue.
Yeah, yeah. And if you think that sounds bad, it's actually better than any MRF that I've seen any data on. The closest one is like 70-some%.
Wow.
We were at 60-something when we started, but actually I had it on my
Is
screen.
that by weight? That's by
Uh,
weight.
That's by weight. Yeah. So, and like aluminum at one time was 2%, and it's like 0.4%.
Oh, you mentioned in the presentation where you looked at your residuals and you realized that one of your magnets was
Yeah,
off.
when
so-
it was off one
So-
month
Yeah.
in the past.
This
you
past
mentioned
year,
it,
we've had like a steel magnet wasn't working, so the steel level went up. We had certain types of plastics that meant that optical sorter
Right.
wasn't functioning the way it was supposed to. So it would tell us, real time we could go and fix something. Now when I say real time, I always have to kind of bite my lip and say it's not real time. It's just a snapshot.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But there is real time technology that's available. Nobody's using it for this application yet. But the very same scanner that's used on the T-Tech can be used on a belt, and it can scan that belt in real time. Could be giving you just imagine a trending screen that's showing you, the different commodities, and it could even have set control parameters. So if you're trending and all of a sudden aluminum goes up and out of your trend, you get an alarm and you know that you've got too much aluminum going down. So that's real technology that's available. And you know, if a person just sat from a design standpoint, you could solve a lot of the woes of the whole process, you know, of recycling. If you did it from curbside all the way through it, with all these failure modes in mind, you could do a process. It wouldn't have to, when you talk about these technology, first thing, when people think small, they think in terms of, well, that's cost too much, it makes it cost prohibitive, but it really doesn't. In the big picture, you're actually driving costs down, labor, and all that stuff. So, you know, if you're...
Are we missing, then on the other side of the stream is supply chain, I should say, is new markets for recycled.
Yeah, that's real important. That's real important.
Whether it's the glass, like, so these guys aren't your only ones, or whether it's whatever,
Yeah.
and preferably not on the other side of the globe, that you don't have to ship it.
Yeah, one of the things I've let me find something real quick. And I'll share it with you. So, I made this presentation. I don't know who made it for. I just made it because I know one day I wanted to try to explain it. But it's like ideas I have in my head, so in this world it's a whole lot easier on PowerPoint. Eventually you'll be explaining it, so you guys get to see it. So, we're talking about recycling supply and demand. You guys are MBA students, right? So, you recognize this? Okay, there's your price point. Okay, if this is your processing cost, then this is your profit, right? In between there, hopefully. And then recyclers can make money with that. If there's falling demand, like say Chinese economy, you know, declines, or any economy, or within a certain commodity, there's a falling demand because of certain oversupply that can happen. Then, or I'll say underconsumption, if you want to call it that way. Then you'll see recyclers lose money. It's moved down to this point, but the supply has stayed constant. And that's what, when you think of municipal recycling, that supply staying constant, even when the demand falls, is going to mean a lower price point. Yeah. And then if you compound that with increasing the supply, so right now it's a 75% goal for Florida. We're not making 75%. It's like 39 to 45%. So if they actually achieve 75%, if everybody else in the world achieves higher diversion goals, then what the impact is going to be a price point that's even further down. So, you know, you're going to end up over here because you're going to have an increase in supply and falling demand, and you're really going to keep moving to that. So what that's telling you is that has to do with, when we say recycling, has to do with the resale of recovered commodities that have been sorted in the MRF.
Right.
But to your point, what you have to do is create more demand for that, and it may be other applications. You know, waste to energy. There's a company called Interchem. Interchem's in Canada. A brilliant family of people up there, the Chornay family, that have figured out how to take the same stuff on my tip floor and turn it into methanol, alcohol. And so they're producing thousands of gallons of this a month right now, trying to get a plant up to where you can just bring that stuff there and be able to produce methanol. There's a cement kiln that's 12 miles down the road, and I'm working with those guys. They can take like my MRF residue, or right now that I'm producing, shred it, and use it as an alternative for coal. So, you know, BTU for BTU, they can replace the coal, and it doesn't have to now be, you know, mined out of the ground. and the ash from that can be used in the cement. So there is no waste stream that would come. So it's both a fuel and actually a
Did
material.
they actually pay you for it, or you just,
That remains to be seen.
at least you don't have to pay to have to
Yeah.
haul and dispose? Or,
And it doesn't have to fill up a landfill. So as long as the
Right.
economics, even if the economics were break even,
oh, it'd still
you
be
know,
worth it.
it's still to our advantage because we sell landfill space. If you think about a landfill is a perpetual warehouse, right?
Yeah.
So we don't get exemptions forever. Monarch Hill is not going to get any higher.
Yeah.
I mean, it will get higher, but
At some point
we're not
it's
going to
gonna-
get an extension on how high it can go. And what we're selling is the collection and disposal of that. So we don't want to fill it up with something that's coming out of our own process. It's to our advantage to let anybody else have that send it to Monarch Hill or any of our other landfills. Monarch Hill's.
So you're giving
Mount
it to
Cashmore,
them.
in case you're wondering.
You're giving it to them.
If we gave it to them, I'm saying that we
Oh.
would be money ahead. Right now, we haven't started that. I've got a proposal to put equipment here on my site, and I would shred the material and prepare it for them, and then they would send a trailer here, we'd load it up for them, and they would take it to their cement kiln. So that would be one way. And if you think about it, if you could use that as a market lever, you know, so right now, there's certain, like you said, Murph film, or they call it Murph film, is the bags, Publix bags. If Publix bags came here, if I recovered all those Publix bags, I still don't have a market for it because it's dirty. When it comes through the stream like this, nobody wants to buy it. At best, I might get somebody to take it off my hands for free, but that's real, and it's very limited. It's really hard to do that. But it's a very good fuel, man. It's fantastic, you know, for a fuel. It's pure polyethylene bags. I mean, you ever melt plastic, it drips. You know, it puts off a lot of fire. It's fuel. So you can take that Murph fuel, you can take the bag film, bale it, and send it to these places, or shred it and send it to these places, and it'd have a very high fuel, value for them. And they very well may pay for it. There is that possibility. If they don't have to process it, and it's a fuel, and it offsets the cost for them, there's going to be some sweet spot where
Right.
where it'll make sense for them.
But glass still doesn't make sense.
The glass.
Just to me, glass is just bad.
So when I left the
terrible.
EP,
Why do
basically,
people make it seem so much better than plastic?
Well, no, because no one knows that it
Yeah.
shreds your machine.
They don't know
it's
what happens
horrible.
at the end. So.
If you
And
didn't have
it doesn't
machine, if
end
you
up
floated
very-
everything and you didn't have rubber and
Because it's in
steel
biodegradable.
with the glass,
Plastic's not.
that'd be
It's in
different, but
biodegradable
it's just
glass.
totally
Is it
incompatible.
glass
when I left
biodegradable?
EP,
So like the
what they
can-
basically said was
Eventually.
If it lands in a landfill.
But how
That
long
that they've
is that
got to
plastic
figure out what to
thick
do.
as hell?
Yeah.
They said maybe we need to lower our diversion goal, so
Just tell them
cities
not
don't feel like they have
See,
to
it
do
doesn't, I can't imagine that the consumers are gonna not want to recycle glass because that was before recycling. We were recycling glass by recollection and all that stuff, so unless you found another way, you just separate the stream because we say no, but if we keep it, like the deposit, whatever places, you have special collection
But
things.
here's what's here. You remember that picture I showed you of single stream recycling? I think the volume of glass, if you look at year over year, the infrastructure that could take the recycled bottles back in those days was probably in balance with the amount that was being produced. Now, it's such massive volumes that there is not that infrastructure in place downstream to take that glass and do something with it. It just doesn't exist.
But if it's preserved to a high level of quality, maybe
Yeah, if
there's
it's
more of a
just
market
the
for it.
pure
Again,
glass.
you can create more demand because it doesn't have to be, it's not processed to a lower value level like,
It's not
O&P.
ground down all the way
No,
through all
it's-
this. It's
very
collected
dense,
separately.
and it's expensive
Very
to
heavy.
ship as far as freight.
Yeah.
So in a place where I have a high, area of concentration, Dallas or something like that, or it's trapped inland, there's no export market for it.
What happened to glass fault? Used to use it in roads. No, you ever heard of that?
Yes, I know about that.
Yeah. I don't know anything if it was like horrible, but
Yeah.
I knew it existed.
DOT regulates that, and there's specifications where they can use glass, but they can't just take the crushed glass that's got all the crap in it.
Mine-
You would have
Yeah,
to
but
be
if it
prepared
was
to a certain
separate
cost.
collection,
Yeah. Yes, if it's a separate collection, you had a whole different stream for the collection of it. So it is really something that the people on the municipal side have to get much more engaged with the recyclers to find out what's going on with all this stuff anyway. Once you take it, what do you do with it? So that if the intent is that it gets recycled, they need to re-examine their collection methods, the contamination. If it's glass, you know, if they said, oh, well, you're not recycling it anyway, it's going to a landfill, then sure, let's figure out something different.
I just don't see them being the ones to figure it out.
No.
You're right. The politicians are bureaucrats, and it's
No,
too slow.
it's got to be a market that's going to say, hey, we want this, do it this way, and we'll, you know,
Need the
we'll go
glass.
around that.
Well,
I don't know.
I don't know. It's not a market-driven economy. That's a problem.
Well, it needs to be.
Well, it's not.
Well, it can be. That's what you're saying. It needs to get back in balance with the market to survive. Otherwise, it's stupid. You know, it's always pushing a rope. We're in a capitalistic society. It
You're
needs to be a
absolutely
market-driven.
pushing your rope. That's
We
what
need to
it's
create a
like.
market for glass.
So, you know, what you need is you need to find a market that will sustain it.
Who?
I don't know.
Collectively,
We need to.
We-
somebody.
Some other guy.
No, I don't speak glass.
I don't speak.
No, I don't know what the solution is. You know, SMIs, you know, they're like
I
a
mean, you look
villain,
at it as
but yet they're the only people doing it.
you have
so-
anything from full bottles, unbroken, different colors, all the way down to particles. What are the options to use those types of things? You know, you'll find, you know, maybe at certain points there's no use if it's in a tweener zone. If it gets all the way down to dust, everyone wants it. If it's in this size, a lot of people want it, but if it's this range, it's no good to anyone. If it's full bottles, it's great, but if they're broken, nobody wants, you know, it's,
Yeah, I don't know. 5 years from now, you know, it might be it might be gold or something, you know, to have fresh glass. But right now, it's just, there's, you know.
The thing is that for you guys, it's mixed with everything else, so
oh,
it's not
it's
just.
killing you. You just need to get rid of it.
It's not just crushed glass.
It really needs to come out of the single stream.
Yeah.
That is
It
true.
really does. Because it's just,
Single stream
you know,
glass.
it's just mechanically, it doesn't seem like
No.
it's just totally incompatible. And always will be.
Because it's glass.
Because it's glass. And the way you're handling this stuff just doesn't work glass. I had no I didn't even think about it to this level until today. It's like, oh my
I know.
God, glass is a
Horrible.
problem, not because of no one wants to buy it. It's
We're
a
gonna
problem
start a
because it
marketing
shreds
campaign.
your whole
Glass is an
your whole
issue.
sorting process.
Yeah.
Always.
Yeah. That's what I say, even, like, we just created these new CNG.
I buy so
collection
much
cars.
wine. I want to die.
Get a bladder. Get the
Maybe you
bladder
think
of
about
wine.
cutting back a little.
Get bigger bottles.
But it's
You don't
still a
have to-
bottle. I'm gonna have to buy boxed wine. Because I'm so upset.
What is it?
No, it
Or
just,
stop drinking.
I mean, I have these conversations with people. And you're right. I mean, if you look at my bin at home, when I put glass in it, it was wine bottles, you know, because between my wife and I,
Well,
But-
then
but-
again, the whole incentive of if I
If
don't
I had
put the
to go
glass
drop
in,
it
if
off
I don't put the
somewhere
glass
else.
in my recycle bin, then I'm going to have to pay 3, 4, 5 times the price to throw it out in my other bin because it's going in the other bin.
And people already think it's something good, so it's hard to change your mind to now go glass
Yes.
isn't good. I shouldn't, because they don't understand this. The average person, the average people in the world aren't even at this
See, and I
level
still
to have
think-
this conversation.
No.
we're
You know,
having
when we
right
walk
now,
in here
so.
and you see those special boxes for conveying
The light bulb?
mercury, the light, I still think you guys should. Now I know that's a dwindling market because CFLs are going away. Thank goodness. But you know, we still got tons of
How many offices on?
office, and I don't know, and LEDs will replace those too. There's no reason they won't. So it's a fleeting market. So it's maybe not worth it, but you could own that market right now. You could go into the big box stores and put your boxes in there, because right now, oh my God, you go in there and right now people just throw stuff in these metal containers, unlined metal containers. It's absurd.
I need to revolutionize recycling in the world. The whole world.
What I do is when I buy like new LED lights, I'll keep the packaging, I'll wrap, and I'll put my CFLs in that and tape them up, and then I put them in the thing so they don't break.
Well, most people aren't conscious of the next step. The average
Oh, no,
person doesn't
it's
know
to the
what
curve-
happens
the curve
after
is the end
anything
for
they
them.
do. You know, they're just most people are very short-sighted. It's this thing I'm doing.
Yeah,
and
but
that's
yeah,
that.
even if they were, even
You're
if I
lucky
get
I'm
these
throwing
things into
this
that
one.
little bin without breaking them, I have no confidence that they're going to be handled in any sort of. And we're talking about mercury. We're not talking
Right.
about you know, this is
But
hazardous
to
waste. Well, this isn't just
average person, they don't know
inconvenient
what
waste. This is
mercury
hazardous waste.
Mercury is.
Yeah.
That's what I'm saying.
Whatever. All right.
Anyway, I don't know.
Average person doesn't.
It's
start
interesting.
mercury.
It's a fascinating business to me after being
So
in
upset.
It is.
under less.
This has been a lot of fun. It's always a lot of fun.